The year was 1876, in the shadow of the Black Hills gold rush, where fortunes were made and lost on the turn of a shovel. In the small settlement of Pine Creek, Dakota Territory, opportunity and desperation walked hand in hand down the dusty main street. But for a woman like Rebecca Miller, neither gold nor glory dictated her fate. Only the rigid expectations of a frontier society where survival often meant sacrificing one's own dreams. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The daughter of the town's only general store owner, Rebecca stood behind that worn wooden counter day after day, watching others chase their destinies, while her own remained fixed in place like the heavy glass jars that lined the shelves around her. Little did she know that the arrival of a stranger from a different world would shatter the fragile chains of obligation that bound her to a life she never chose. Rebecca Miller wiped the sweat from her brow as she rearranged the display of canned preserves near the front window of Miller General Store. July heat hung heavy in the air, intensified by the drought that had plagued Pine Creek for weeks. The small bell above the door jingled, announcing the arrival of Mrs. Dorothy Wilson, whose penchant for gossip was as reliable as her weekly purchases. "Good afternoon, Rebecca," the older woman greeted, her eyes scanning the store with practiced precision. "Your father around today?" "He's gone to meet the supply wagon," Rebecca replied, continuing her work. "Can I help you with something?" Dorothy set her basket on the counter, leaning forward slightly. "Did you hear about Elijah Cooper? Found him passed out behind the rusty nail again this morning. Sheriff Parker had to dump a bucket of water on him just to get him standing." Rebecca forced a tight smile. Elijah Cooper's drunken exploits were a constant source of entertainment for Pine Creek's residents, though Rebecca found nothing amusing about a man drinking himself to death by inches. "That'll be 63 cents for the flour and sugar, Mrs. Wilson," Rebecca said, deliberately changing the subject. "Would you like that on your account?" Dorothy handed over the coins with reluctance. "Your father should really consider raising your prices with all these miners coming through. Wilson's Dry Goods over in Deadwood charges nearly double." "We serve our neighbors first," Rebecca replied, reciting her father's business philosophy. "Miners come and go, but Pine Creek folks remain." As Dorothy gathered her purchases, she paused. "Speaking of neighbors, Reverend Thompson was asking after you. Says he hasn't seen you at Sunday service in 2 weeks." The invisible weight on Rebecca's shoulders grew heavier. "I've been helping Father with inventory. Please tell the Reverend I'll be there this Sunday." After Dorothy left, Rebecca leaned against the counter, momentarily closing her eyes. At 23, she was already considered dangerously close to spinsterhood by Pine Creek standards. The pressure to find a husband increased with each passing year, though suitable options were limited. Most men her age had either died in the war, headed west years ago, or were among the rough fortune seekers flowing through town, hardly proper husband material. The real truth, which Rebecca kept buried deep, was that she had no interest in marrying any man from Pine Creek. Her dreams extended beyond the dusty confines of this struggling settlement, beyond the role of shopkeeper's wife or farmer's helpmate. As a girl, she devoured books about far-off places, imagining herself exploring distant shores. Now those childish fantasies were tucked away, like the old geography primer hidden beneath her bed. "Rebecca!" Her father's voice broke through her thoughts as Walter Miller pushed through the door, his arms laden with packages. "Help me with these, will you?" The new shipment finally arrived. Walter Miller was a tall man with stooped shoulders and permanently ink-stained fingers from tallying accounts. Since her mother's death 5 years ago from fever, Rebecca had watched him grow more withdrawn, pouring his energy into the store and leaving little room for anything else. "Did they have the medicine for Dr. Grant?" Rebecca asked, taking several boxes from her father's arms. And the new school books Mrs. Parker requested, Walter confirmed. Business should pick up this week. Word is, another group of miners is passing through on their way to the hills. Rebecca began unpacking the shipment, cataloguing each item with practiced efficiency. Mrs. Wilson suggests we raise our prices. Walter snorted. Dorothy Wilson would sell her own mother for an extra penny of profit. We do things differently here. The afternoon passed in a steady rhythm of customers, most stopping for essentials before continuing their journey west. Rebecca wrapped parcels, calculated totals, and maintained the polite smile expected of her, even as her feet ached and her mind wandered. As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows through the store windows, the bell jingled once more. Rebecca looked up to see Sheriff Parker, his expression grim beneath his mustache. Walter, he nodded to her father. Miss Rebecca. Sheriff, Walter acknowledged. What brings you by? Parker removed his hat, running a hand through thinning hair. Got a situation I thought you should know about. Elijah Cooper's been causing trouble again, this time at the Wilson place. Walter frowned. What kind of trouble? Drunk as a skunk, tried to force his way into their barn, said he was looking for a place to sleep, scared Mrs. Wilson something. Fierce, the sheriff sighed. This is the third incident this month. The town council's meeting tonight to discuss what to do with him. Rebecca continued straightening merchandise, listening while pretending not to. Elijah Cooper had once been Pine Creek's most promising young man, smart, hardworking, even handsome in a rough-hewn way. Then the war came. He returned from fighting with the Union a changed man, haunted by whatever horrors he'd witnessed. The bottle became his constant companion, and the charming young blacksmith transformed into the town drunk. He needs help, not punishment, Rebecca said quietly, unable to contain herself. Both men turned to look at her, surprised by her interjection. Rebecca, her father said, his tone carrying a warning. The sheriff offered a sympathetic smile. Wish it were that simple, Miss Rebecca, but we've tried helping. Reverend Thompson took him in for a spell last winter. Dr. Grant's given him medicines to ease his nerves. Nothing sticks. Rebecca returned to her task, but her mind remained on Elijah Cooper. She remembered him from before the war. He'd fixed their wagon once, refusing payment except for one of her mother's apple pies. She'd been just 16 then, secretly admiring his easy smile and strong hands. The man who occasionally stumbled past the store window now bore little resemblance to that memory. After the sheriff left, Walter locked the front door and began counting the day's earnings. Rebecca moved around the store, straightening shelves and sweeping the wooden floor. I don't want you concerning yourself with Elijah Cooper, her father said suddenly, not looking up from his ledger. It's not proper for a young woman to involve herself with such matters. I only said he needs help, Rebecca replied, continuing her sweeping. Men like that are beyond help, Walter said firmly. They make their choices and live with the consequences. Rebecca bit her tongue, knowing further argument would only irritate her father. Later, as they ate a simple supper of beans and cornbread, in their living quarters behind the store, Walter cleared his throat. Reverend Thompson mentioned you haven't been attending Sunday service. Rebecca set down her fork. I've been tired. The heat makes it difficult to sleep. The Reverend believes regular attendance would be beneficial for both of us. Walter paused. He also mentioned that his nephew is arriving next month. From Boston, a seminary graduate. The implication hung in the air between them. Another potential suitor being dangled before her, another attempt to secure her future in the only way Pine Creek society deemed appropriate. I'll attend this Sunday, Rebecca promised, choosing to address only the first part of her father's statement. That night, unable to sleep in the stifling heat of her small room, Rebecca sat by the window, gazing at the starlit sky above Pine Creek. In the distance, beyond the scattered lights of the settlement, lay the dark silhouette of the hills. And Somewhere beyond those hills was the world she'd only read about. Cities with paved streets and gaslight, oceans stretching to distant horizons, people whose lives weren't constrained by the narrow expectations of a frontier town. A commotion in the street drew her attention. Squinting in the darkness, she made out several figures struggling outside the rusty nail saloon. A man's voice rose in drunken protest, followed by laughter and jeering. Rebecca recognized Elijah, Cooper's lanky form as he was roughly pushed out the saloon door, stumbling to his knees in the dirt. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Stay out, Cooper!" the saloon keeper shouted. "You're cut off until you can pay your tab!" Two men, miners by the look of them, laughed as Elijah tried to stand, falling again. Rebecca's hands tightened on the windowsill. This wasn't entertainment. It was cruelty. Before she could reconsider, she grabbed her shawl and quietly made her way through the store and out the side door. The night air felt marginally cooler as she hurried down the alley behind the buildings, emerging onto the main street several yards from where Elijah now sat in the dirt, his back against a hitching post. The miners had lost interest and returned to the saloon, leaving him alone in the darkness. "Mr. Cooper," Rebecca said softly, approaching cautiously. "Are you hurt?" Elijah's head jerked up, eyes struggling to focus. "Miss Miller?" His voice was slurred but tinged with surprise. "What are you doing out so late?" "I saw what happened," she explained, keeping a respectful distance. "I thought you might need assistance." He let out a bitter laugh. "Don't waste your kindness on me, Miss Miller. Town's got plenty more deserving." Rebecca glanced around, relieved to find the street empty of witnesses. "At least let me help you to Dr. Grant's. You've cut your head." Elijah touched his temple, his fingers coming away dark with blood. "It's nothing," he mumbled. "Just need to sleep it off." "Where will you go? The sheriff mentioned you tried the Wilson's barn." He attempted to stand, wobbling dangerously before slumping back down. "Got a spot by the creek, under the cottonwoods." Rebecca frowned. The creek bed was nearly dry, and the thought of him sleeping there, injured and intoxicated, didn't sit right. "Wait here," she said, making a sudden decision. "I'll be right back." Hurrying back to the store, Rebecca gathered a canteen of water, a clean cloth, and a small jar of healing salve Dr. Grant had made for her father's arthritis. She hesitated, then added a leftover biscuit wrapped in a cloth napkin. When she returned, Elijah hadn't moved. His eyes were closed, head tilted back against the post. For a moment, with the moonlight softening his features, she could see traces of the man he'd once been. "Mr. Cooper," she said, kneeling beside him but maintaining a proper distance, "let me clean that cut." His eyes fluttered open. "Why are you being nice to me, Miss Miller?" Rebecca dampened the cloth and gently pressed it to his temple. "Because no one else is," she answered honestly. They sat in silence as she tended his wound. Despite the alcohol on his breath, his gaze gradually cleared, watching her with an intensity that made her self-conscious. "You shouldn't be seen with me," he finally said. "Your reputation. It's late. No one's watching." She applied a small amount of salve to the cut. "And I don't particularly care what people think." That made him smile, a lopsided, sad thing that disappeared as quickly as it had formed. "You should. In a place like this, reputation's all a woman has." Rebecca handed him the water and biscuit, standing to smooth her skirts. "Will you be all right getting to the creek? It's a fair distance." Elijah took a long drink, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "Been making that walk for longer than I care to remember," he said, his voice steadier now. "Thank you, Miss Miller. You're kind, like your mother was." The mention of her mother startled Rebecca. "You remember her?" "The best apple pies in the territory," he said, attempting to stand again. This time he succeeded, though he swayed slightly. And she never looked at me like I was something the cat dragged in, even after I came back. Changed. Rebecca felt a lump form in her throat. "Good night, Mr. Cooper. Please be careful." As she turned to leave, he called after her, his voice carrying in the quiet night. "You don't belong here either, do you, Miss Miller? I can see it in your eyes. Same look I had before the war." Rebecca froze, his words striking a chord too true to dismiss. Without responding, she hurried back to the store, slipping inside, and up to her room before her father could discover her absence. Sleep eluded her that night, her mind filled with Elijah's words and the brief glimpse she'd caught of the man behind the drunken exterior, a man who, like her, perhaps didn't. He fit the role Pine Creek had assigned him. Sunday arrived hot and cloudless. Rebecca wore her best dress, a modest blue cotton with white piping that had once belonged to her mother, altered to fit her slightly taller frame. Walter straightened his necktie in the small mirror by the door, his expression solemn as always. "On church days, you look nice," he commented, a rare compliment. "Reverend Thompson will be pleased to see you." The small white church sat on a slight rise at the north end of town, its bell tower visible from nearly anywhere in Pine Creek. As they approached, Rebecca could see clusters of townsfolk in their Sunday best, exchanging pleasantries and, no doubt, the latest gossip. Mabel Henderson, the postmaster's wife and Pine Creek's most notorious gossip, intercepted them at the church steps. "Walter, Rebecca," she greeted, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "So good to see you both. Especially you, dear. We were beginning to worry." Rebecca forced a polite smile. "Good morning, Mrs. Henderson. Lovely day, isn't it? Indeed, though we desperately need rain." Mabel lowered her voice conspiratorially. "Did you hear? Indians spotted near Willow Creek yesterday. A hunting party, they say, but you never can. Be too careful with those people." Walter stiffened beside her. "Lakota have never given us trouble, Mabel. More likely passing through to their summer grounds." "Well," Mabel sniffed, "Sheriff Parker's keeping an eye out, just the same. After what happened to the Jackson family over in Custer County last spring, one can't be too cautious." Rebecca remained silent, knowing any defense of the native people would only feed Mrs. Henderson's hunger for controversy. The relationship between settlers and the Lakota was complex and often misrepresented by those who preferred fear to understanding. Inside the church, Rebecca took her seat beside her father, nodding politely to familiar faces. The small space filled quickly, the congregation fanning themselves with folded papers against the heat. Reverend Thompson stood at the pulpit, his stern countenance surveying his flock. The service proceeded as expected. Hymns sung without enthusiasm, scripture read in the reverend's monotone voice, and a sermon about moral fortitude that seemed aimed directly at the younger members of the congregation. Rebecca's thoughts drifted, her gaze moving to the open windows where a slight breeze occasionally stirred the curtains. It was during the final prayer that the church door creaked open. Rebecca, eyes open when they should have been closed, watched as Elijah Cooper slipped. Inside, his clothes, while not new, were clean and pressed. His hair was combed and the cut on his temple cleaned. He took a seat in the last pew, head bowed as if trying to make himself invisible. A ripple of whispers spread through the congregation. Reverend Thompson paused briefly, then continued his prayer with pointed emphasis on redemption and forgiveness. Rebecca couldn't help the small smile that tugged at her lips. Despite everything, Elijah had made an effort to attend service, something he hadn't done in years, according to town gossip. As the congregation rose for the final hymn, Rebecca caught Elijah's eye. He gave an almost imperceptible nod, and she knew her small act of kindness had somehow encouraged this step. Perhaps there was still hope for the man Pine Creek had written. Offers beyond salvation. The moment was interrupted by a commotion outside, raised voices and the sound of horses approaching at speed. Sheriff Parker stood from his pew, moving quickly toward the door. Reverend Thompson stopped mid-verse, his expression darkening at the disruption. "Please remain seated," he instructed, as several men, including Rebecca's father, followed the sheriff outside. Naturally, no one obeyed. The congregation flowed out onto the church steps, Rebecca among them, curious about the disturbance. 3 riders had pulled up in front of the church, their horses lathered and breathing heavily from hard riding. Rebecca recognized Marcus Williams, a rancher whose property lay several miles outside town. "Sheriff!" Williams called out, his face flushed with exertion. "Indians coming this way, at least 20, maybe more." Murmurs of alarm spread through the crowd. Sheriff Parker raised his hands for quiet. "Did they show any hostile intent? Were they armed?" "Course they were armed," one of Williams's companions spat. "When ain't they?" "They're keeping to the main trail," Williams clarified. "Didn't approach the ranch, but my boy spotted them from the North Ridge, heading this way for certain." Rebecca noticed Elijah had emerged from the church, standing apart from the crowd, but listening intently. His eyes met hers briefly before returning to the sheriff. "Likely just passing through to the reservation," Sheriff Parker said, though. His hand rested on his holstered pistol. "But we'll take precautions. Gentlemen, let's gather at my office. Ladies, best return to your homes for now." The crowd began to disperse, excited voices speculating about the Indians' purpose. Rebecca felt a hand on her arm and turned to find her father. "Come," he said, his expression grave. "We need to get back to the store." As they walked quickly down the main street, Rebecca ventured a question. "Do you think there's really danger?" Or Walter's pace didn't slow. "Probably not, but people are afraid of what they don't understand, and fear makes men do foolish things." At the store, Walter immediately began checking the shotgun he kept beneath the counter, a relic from his own brief military service. Rebecca watched, concern growing at her father's unusual agitation. "Should we close for the day?" she asked. Walter shook his head. "No, we carry on as normal. Anything else only feeds the panic." Throughout the afternoon, customers trickled, in each bringing fresh rumors about the approaching Lakota. By midday, the story had transformed from a small traveling party to a warband intent on raiding. Rebecca did her best to maintain calm, following her father's example of business as usual. It was near closing time when the actual riders appeared. From the store window, Rebecca watched as 7 mounted men rode slowly down Pine Creek's main street. They were indeed Lakota, their traditional dress mixed with elements of white man's clothing, cotton shirts, some with vests or blankets despite the heat. They carried weapons, rifles and bows, but kept them unraised, clearly visible, but non-threatening. The leader rode slightly ahead, a tall man with braided hair and a quiet dignity in his bearing. Unlike the others, he wore a single eagle feather tied in his hair. As they passed the general store, his gaze swept over the building, briefly meeting Rebecca's eyes through the window. Something in that momentary connection made Rebecca's breath catch, not fear, but recognition of a profound difference from the men she knew. This man carried himself with a certainty of purpose she had rarely witnessed. The small party continued through town without stopping, though Sheriff Parker and several armed townsmen watched their progress carefully from the boardwalk. Only when they had passed beyond the last buildings did the tension in the air begin to dissipate. "They're headed for the creek," Walter observed, having joined Rebecca at the window, "probably making camp for the night." "Who do you think they are?" Rebecca asked. "Trading party most likely," her father replied. "They come through a few times a year, usually staying clear of town. Must need supplies badly to risk riding through Pine Creek with all this gold rush tension." That evening, as Rebecca prepared a simple supper, Walter sat at their small table reviewing the ledger. "I've been thinking," he said without looking up, "perhaps it's time we considered your future more seriously." Rebecca set down the knife she'd been using to cut bread, her stomach tightening. "My future." "You're not getting any younger, Rebecca," he said, his tone matter-of-fact. "And I won't be here forever to look after you. A woman alone on the frontier. It's not safe or proper. I'm perfectly capable of running the store on my own," she countered, trying to keep her voice even. Walter closed the ledger. "That's not the point. You need security, respectability, a husband." Rebecca turned away, busying herself with the stove to hide her expression. "Is there a particular reason you're bringing this up now?" Her father sighed. "Reverend Thompson approached me after church. His nephew arrives next week. Jonathan, I believe his name is. Well-educated, from a good Boston family." "And?" Rebecca prompted, though she already knew where this was heading, and the Reverend suggested a dinner to make introductions. Walter's tone softened slightly. "Rebecca, look at me." She turned reluctantly, meeting her father's gaze. "I only want what's best for you," he said. "What your mother would have wanted, security, a good name, children." Rebecca felt the familiar tightness in her chest, the sensation of invisible walls closing in. "And if that's not what I want?" Walter's expression hardened. "Then what do you want? To end up alone? To have people whisper about you like they do about the widow Jenkins? This isn't Boston or New York, Rebecca. Out here a woman needs protection." "I don't need protecting," she said quietly. "I need the freedom to choose my own path." "Freedom," Walter repeated, as if the word itself were foolish. "That's a luxury few can afford, especially women." The conversation ended there, as it always did when they approached this subject. Later, lying in bed, listening to the distant sounds of the saloon, Rebecca thought about the Lakota riders. They had come and gone as they pleased, following their own rhythms rather than the rigid structures of Pine Creek society. And she thought of Elijah Cooper, a man destroyed by the very society that now shunned him. His appearance at church suggested a desire to reclaim some part of his former self. But would Pine Creek allow it? Would they ever see beyond what he had become to remember what he had once been? Sleep came fitfully. Her dreams filled with images of the Lakota leader's penetrating gaze and Elijah's sad smile, both men somehow representing different versions of freedom she could never attain. Morning arrived with unexpected commotion. Rebecca had just begun opening the store when Sheriff Parker burst through the door, his expression grim. "Walter around?" he asked, removing his hat. "In the storeroom," Rebecca replied, alarmed by his manner. "Is something wrong?" Before the sheriff could answer, her father emerged, carrying a crate of canned goods. "James, what brings you by so early?" Parker glanced at Rebecca, hesitating. "Might be best to speak privately, Walter." "Anything you have to say can be said in front of my daughter," Walter replied, setting down the crate. "What's happened?" The sheriff nodded reluctantly. "There was trouble last night. Elijah Cooper got himself good and liquored up at the Rusty Nail, then took it upon himself to ride out to where those Indians are camped." Rebecca felt her stomach drop. "Is he hurt?" "Not exactly," Parker said, looking uncomfortable. "According to Elijah, he rode out there to trade for tobacco, but the way the Indians tell it," he paused. "Well, their leader rode into town at first light, madder than a wet hen. Says Elijah tried to steal one of their horses." "That doesn't sound like Elijah," Walter frowned, "even at his worst." "Man was blind drunk," Parker countered. "Might not even remember what he did. But these Lakota take horse theft mighty serious. Their leader, calls himself Thomas Two Rivers, is demanding justice." "What kind of justice?" Rebecca asked, her voice barely audible. The sheriff shifted his weight. "Traditional compensation. Says Elijah must give up something of equal value or face their tribal punishment." Walter rubbed his forehead. "And what does Elijah say?" "Claims he's innocent, but he can't explain how he ended up in their camp." Parker sighed heavily. Either way, he's got nothing of value to give. Everything he owns wouldn't amount to half what a good horse is worth. So what happens now? Rebecca pressed. Town council's meeting this morning to decide. Two Rivers says they'll wait until sundown for our answer. Parker replaced his hat. Just wanted to give you a heads up, Walter. With tensions already. High about Indians in the area, this could get ugly fast. After the sheriff left, Rebecca turned to her father. Do you think Elijah really tried to steal a horse? Walter began unpacking the crate, his movements methodical. Doesn't matter. What matters is keeping peace in this town, even at the expense of an innocent man, Rebecca challenged. Her father's eyes narrowed. Elijah Cooper hasn't been innocent in a long time, Rebecca, and your concern for him is becoming inappropriate. Rebecca bit back a retort, knowing it would only make matters worse. Throughout the morning, customers brought fresh snippets of gossip about the situation. By noon, the story had grown to include Elijah insulting the Lakota leader and attempting to steal multiple horses. Unable to contain her curiosity any longer, Rebecca used the lunch hour as an excuse to visit Mrs. Wilson's shop, where gossip flowed as freely as coffee. Rebecca, dear, Dorothy greeted her with unusual warmth. Have you heard about the trouble with the Indians? Rebecca nodded, selecting a small sack of hard candy. Sheriff Parker mentioned something. Do you know what happened exactly? Dorothy leaned across the counter, lowering her voice conspiratorially. Mabel Henderson's boy was helping at the saloon last night. Says Elijah was ranting about savages camping on white man's land before he rode out there. That doesn't sound like the Elijah I remember, Rebecca said carefully. War changes men, Dorothy replied with a dismissive wave, and the bottle changes them even more. Anyway, the town council's decided. Rebecca's heart quickened. Already, what did they decide? Sheriff's arresting Elijah for public drunkenness and disturbing the peace. He'll spend 30 days in jail. Dorothy's eyes gleamed with the pleasure of delivering news, and they're asking Two Rivers to accept that as justice. Will he? Rebecca asked. Dorothy shrugged. Who knows with their kind, but Sheriff Parker's deputized extra men just in case there's trouble. Rebecca paid for her purchase and left, her mind racing. Pine Creek's jail was little more than a single cell attached to the sheriff's office, barely fit for housing a person overnight, let alone for a month. And Elijah, for all his faults, had tried to attend church just yesterday, a small step toward rejoining society. As she passed the sheriff's office, she noticed a small crowd gathered outside. Through a gap between onlookers, she glimpsed Elijah seated inside the cell, his head in his hands. Outside, several men argued loudly, their voices carrying, 30 days is too good for him. Should just hand him over to the Indians, see how he likes their justice. This is white man's territory. We don't answer to savages. Rebecca hurried past, disturbed by the ugly turn of sentiment. Back at the store, she found her father in conversation with Reverend Thompson, their expressions grave. Ah, Rebecca, the Reverend greeted her. Your father and I were just discussing tomorrow's dinner. My nephew Jonathan arrives on the afternoon stage. Rebecca stared incredulously. You're still planning a dinner with everything that's happening? Walter's expression hardened. Life continues, Rebecca. This situation with Cooper will resolve itself. And if it doesn't, she challenged, if the Lakota don't accept our version of justice, then the men of this town will do what's necessary, Reverend Thompson said firmly. But I hardly think this is appropriate conversation for a young lady. Rebecca felt her cheeks flush with anger. When men talk of violence, suddenly women aren't to be included, yet we suffer the consequences all the same. Rebecca! Walter's voice carried a warning. Apologized to the Reverend. She knew she had crossed a line, but the injustice of it all, Elijah's situation, the town's eagerness for conflict, her own impending dinner with a stranger who might become her husband, pushed her beyond caution. "I'm sorry if my concern, but peace offends you, Reverend," she said, not entirely masking her sarcasm. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to finish the inventory." She retreated to the storeroom, heart pounding. Through the thin walls, she could hear her father apologizing for her behavior, attributing it to womanly nerves and the unsettling events of the day. By late afternoon, Pine Creek hummed with tension. Men gathered in small groups along the main street, many openly carrying rifles or pistols. The saloon did brisk business despite the early hour. From the store window, Rebecca watched as Sheriff Parker and his deputies positioned themselves at strategic points around town. "Close the shutters," Walter instructed, as the sun began its descent, "and bring in the displays from the boardwalk." Rebecca complied silently, understanding the precaution. As she secured the last shutter, movement at the end of the street caught her eye. Thomas Two Rivers, accompanied by two other Lakota men, rode slowly into town. They carried no visible weapons, but their expressions were solemn. The crowd parted. As they approached the sheriff's office, whispers and mutters following their progress. Rebecca abandoned her task, moving to the door despite her father's protest. Outside, she joined the growing crowd of onlookers, keeping to the edge as Sheriff Parker met the Lakota leader in front of the jail. "Two Rivers," the sheriff acknowledged. "The town council has made its decision. Elijah Cooper will serve 30 days in jail for his actions." The Lakota leader sat tall on his horse, his gaze steady. When he spoke, his English was clear and deliberate. "This is not justice. This man tried to steal what was not his. In your own law, is this not a serious crime?" "He's being punished according to our ways," Parker insisted. "That's all you're going to get." Murmurs of agreement rose from the gathered townsmen. Two Rivers surveyed the crowd, his expression unchanged. "Then I challenge him," he said simply. "In the tradition of both our peoples, man against man. If he wins, the matter is settled. If I win, he comes with us for one moon to learn our ways." The declaration sent a shock through the crowd. Sheriff Parker looked taken aback. "That's not how we handle things here?" "Is it not?" Two Rivers asked. "Do your own stories not tell of David and Goliath, of champions who fight for their people? Is this not in your tradition as well as ours?" Rebecca found herself moving closer, drawn by the Lakota leader's dignity and the unexpected wisdom of his words. She had never heard an Indian speak this. Iway reasoned, knowledgeable about white customs, yet proudly maintaining his own perspective. "Cooper's in no condition to fight anyone," someone called out. "He's half drunk and twice a fool." Laughter rippled through the crowd, tinged with cruelty. Two Rivers' expression remained unchanged, but something flickered in his eyes, disappointment perhaps, or contempt. "Then your justice is no justice at all," he said quietly. "You punish a man who cannot defend himself, and you mock him in his weakness." His gaze swept the crowd once more. "We will leave at dawn. But remember this day when you speak of honor and fairness." As he turned his horse to leave, Rebecca found herself stepping forward, compelled by an impulse she couldn't name. "Wait," she called, her voice carrying in the sudden quiet. "What if someone stood in his place?" All eyes turned to her. Rebecca felt her father's horrified gaze, the collective shock of the town, but her focus remained on Thomas Two Rivers. The Lakota leader studied her with interest. "You would fight in his place, woman." A ripple of laughter swept the crowd, quickly silenced by the intensity of the moment. "No," Rebecca clarified, "but someone else might." Her mind raced ahead. Of her words, what she was suggesting was madness, yet somehow it felt like the only path forward, for Elijah, for the town, perhaps even for herself. "Rebecca," her father's voice cut through the murmurs, "come away from there at once." She ignored him, addressing Two Rivers directly. "If a champion fought in Elijah's place, would you accept that?" Two Rivers considered her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "This would be acceptable. Who among you will stand for this man?" Rebecca looked at the faces surrounding her, the sheriff, the townsmen with their weapons, the onlookers eager for drama but unwilling to involve themselves. No one stepped forward. Then, from the doorway of the sheriff's office, a voice called, "Out. I'll do it." The crowd turned as Elijah Cooper stepped forward, his hands still bound, Sheriff Parker gripping his arm. Despite his disheveled appearance, something in his bearing had changed. He stood straighter, his bloodshot eyes clear, with purpose for the first time in years. "This is my mess," Elijah continued, his voice gaining strength. "I'll face the consequences." Sheriff Parker scoffed. "You can barely stand, Cooper." "Untie me and we'll see." Elijah's gaze fixed on Thomas Two Rivers. "I may be a drunk, but I'm not a coward, and I'm not a horse thief either." Two Rivers regarded him thoughtfully. "You deny taking our horse?" "I went to your camp to trade," Elijah insisted. "I admit I was drunk. I might have touched your horses, admired them even, but I never tried to steal one." The Lakota leader exchanged glances with his companions. "Tomorrow at midday," he finally declared, "on the flat land by the creek. If you win, the matter is settled. If I win, you come with us for one turning of the moon to learn our ways." Without waiting for a response, Two Rivers turned his horse and rode away, his companions following. The crowd immediately erupted in excited chatter, the tension transforming into anticipation of the coming spectacle. Rebecca watched as Sheriff Parker led Elijah back into the jail, conflicting emotions churning within her. She felt a hand grip her elbow firmly and turned to find her father, his expression thunderous. "Inside," Walter ordered, his voice low, but brooking no argument. "Now." Back in their living quarters, Walter paced the small room, his controlled anger more frightening than any outburst. "What were you thinking?" he finally demanded. "Involving yourself in men's affairs, challenging a town decision, speaking to that Indian as if you had any authority." Rebecca stood her ground. Someone had to do something. The town was ready to start a war over a misunderstanding. "That's not your place!" Walter slammed his hand on the table. "Do you have any idea what you've done? Your reputation—" "My reputation," Rebecca interrupted, surprising herself with her boldness. "Always my reputation, as if that's all that matters." Walter stared at her, momentarily speechless. When he spoke again, his voice was dangerously quiet. "Tomorrow evening, Reverend Thompson and his nephew will come for dinner. You will be gracious, attentive, and proper in every way. This Jonathan Thompson represents your future, Rebecca. I suggest you remember that." He left the room, the door closing firmly behind him. Rebecca sank onto a chair, the adrenaline of the confrontation draining away and leaving her trembling. Outside, Pine Creek buzzed with excitement over the coming challenge. Inside, her world continued to contract, the walls of expectation closing in more tightly than ever. Sleep eluded her that night. Rebecca lay awake, listening to the occasional sounds of revelry from the saloon, where men likely wagered on tomorrow's outcome. Her thoughts drifted to Elijah, alone in his cell, facing a challenge he was in no condition to win, and to Thomas Two Rivers, whose quiet dignity had affected her more deeply than she cared to admit. Dawn arrived with a pink-gold light that belied the tension in Pine Creek. Rebecca moved through her morning routine mechanically, avoiding her father's stern gaze across the breakfast table. The store remained unusually quiet as most townsfolk prepared for the midday spectacle. By 11, Walter closed the store. "I'm going to make sure this doesn't get out of hand," he told Rebecca. "You will remain here." "But this is not a discussion," he cut her off. "These affairs are no place for a respectable woman." After he left, Rebecca paced the living area, torn between obedience and a compelling need to witness what she had inadvertently helped set in motion. Through the window, she could see people streaming toward the creek, some carrying picnic baskets as if attending a social event rather than what might become a brutal fight. Decision made, she grabbed her shawl and slipped out the side door. Instead of following the main path, she circled behind the buildings, taking a route that would allow her to approach the creek from the opposite direction of the crowd. The late August sun beat down mercilessly as Rebecca picked her way through tall grass and scrub brush. By the time she reached the small rise overlooking the clearing by the creek, a sizable crowd had gathered in a rough circle. Rebecca remained at a distance, partially hidden by a stand of cottonwoods. From here, she could observe without being easily spotted. The Lakota had positioned themselves on the far side of the clearing. About a dozen men sat atop horses, with Thomas Two Rivers dismounted at the front. He had removed his shirt, revealing a muscular torso marked with old scars. His only adornments were a single eagle feather in his braided hair and a beaded band around his upper arm. On the town side, Sheriff Parker stood with Elijah, who appeared unsteady despite obvious efforts to stand straight. Someone had given him a clean shirt, and his face showed signs of recent washing, but the stark contrast between him and the powerful Lakota warrior was painfully obvious. Reverend Thompson stepped into the circle, Bible in hand. "As these two men have agreed to settle their differences in the old way," he announced, his voice carrying across the clearing, "let us pray for a fair contest and peace between our peoples." His prayer was brief and pointed, containing subtle references to civilized behavior and Christian restraint that made Rebecca wince. When he finished, Sheriff Parker stepped forward. "The rules are simple," he declared, addressing both sides. "The fight continues until one man yields or cannot. Continue. No weapons." He looked directly at Two Rivers. "And no Indian tricks." Two Rivers' expression remained impassive, though one of his companions muttered something that caused others to nod in agreement. "Begin when ready," the sheriff concluded, stepping back. For a moment, neither man moved. Then Elijah rolled his shoulders and stepped forward, raising his fists in the standard boxing stance Rebecca had seen men use during friendly contests on Independence Day. Two Rivers approached more cautiously, his stance lower, hands open rather than closed into fists. They circled each other slowly, the crowd growing quiet with anticipation. Elijah struck first, a quick jab that Two Rivers easily evaded. He followed with a more substantial swing that caught only air as the Lakota man stepped aside with surprising grace. The pattern continued, Elijah attacking with increasingly desperate lunges, Two Rivers evading with minimal effort. Rebecca could see Elijah tiring already, sweat streaming down his face in the midday heat. Years of hard drinking had taken their toll on a body once strong and capable. "Fight like a man!" someone shouted from the crowd. "Quit dancing around!" Two Rivers gave no indication he'd heard the taunt. He continued his calculated movements, studying Elijah with detached interest, as if assessing a wild animal rather than an opponent. Frustration mounting, Elijah lunged forward with a powerful but unbalanced swing. Two Rivers sidestepped, and in a move so swift, Rebecca barely caught. It hooked his foot behind Elijah's ankle while simultaneously pushing his shoulder. Elijah crashed to the ground, dust billowing around him. A groan rose from the townsfolk while the Lakota remained silent, watching. Elijah struggled to his feet, his breath coming in harsh gasps. Blood trickled from a cut where his face had struck the ground. "Stay down, you fool," someone called, but Elijah ignored the advice, raising his fists once more. What followed was painful to watch. Two Rivers began to strike now, measured, controlled blows to Elijah's midsection and shoulders. He avoided Elijah's face, Rebecca noticed, even when openings presented themselves. Each impact drove Elijah back a step, yet Two Rivers never pressed his advantage to its fullest. With growing certainty, Rebecca realized the Lakota warrior was deliberately prolonging the fight, giving Elijah every chance to show courage before the inevitable conclusion. It was a gesture of respect that few in the crowd seemed to recognize. Finally, after a particularly solid blow to his ribs, Elijah stumbled and fell to one knee. His face was streaked with sweat and dirt, his breathing labored. He tried to rise, but couldn't summon the strength. Two rivers stood before him, waiting. The clearing fell silent except for Elijah's ragged breathing. "Yield," Two Rivers said quietly, not as a command, but as permission. Elijah looked up, his face a mask of pain and something else, a strange relief, as if this defeat represented a resolution long overdue. "I yield," he gasped. A murmur ran through the crowd, disappointment from some, resignation from others. Two Rivers extended his hand to Elijah, helping him to his feet with surprising gentleness. "You fought with heart," the Lakota said, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Now you will learn with heart as well." Sheriff Parker approached, his expression grim. "So that's it then. Cooper goes with you for 30 days. Two Rivers nodded. "One turning of the moon, he will return unharmed if he follows our ways. And if he doesn't," Walter Miller's voice carried from the edge of the crowd. The Lakota leader's gaze found Rebecca's father. "Then he will learn harder lessons, but he will still return." His eyes scanned the gathering. "We are not the savages you believe us to be." Rebecca felt a strange tightness in her chest as she watched Two Rivers lead Elijah toward the Lakota horses. Though she had known Elijah since childhood, they had exchanged fewer than a dozen sentences in recent years. Yet something about his defeat and surrender affected her deeply. A man who had lost everything now surrendering the last thing he possessed. His freedom to destroy himself as he saw fit. And Thomas Two Rivers, with his quiet strength and measured words, represented something entirely outside her experience. A man unbounded by Pine Creek's narrow definitions of worth and status. As the Lakota prepared to depart, Rebecca slipped away from her hiding place, unwilling to risk discovery. She hurried back toward town, taking the same roundabout path, her mind churning with the implications of what she'd witnessed. By the time she reached the store, customers had already returned, eager to exchange observations and interpretations of the fight. Rebecca busied herself with their needs, offering non-committal responses to their excited questions. Yes, it was unfortunate. No, she hadn't attended. Yes, she supposed Mr. Cooper would survive his time with the Indians. Can you imagine? Mrs. Wilson exclaimed while purchasing fabric. "Living among those people for a month. He'll come back more savage than man, mark my words." Or he might learn something," Rebecca suggested mildly. Mrs. Wilson stared at her as if she'd sprouted a second head. "Learn? From Indians? My dear, what a strange notion." Walter returned mid-afternoon, his mood no improved by the day's events. He worked silently alongside Rebecca until closing time, then reminded her curtly of the evening's dinner engagement. "Wear your green dress," he instructed, "and do something with your hair. Jonathan Thompson is accustomed to Boston refinement." Rebecca retreated to her room to prepare, resentment simmering beneath her dutiful compliance. As she pinned her hair in a style she'd seen in a 6-month-old Harper's Bazaar brought by the stagecoach, she found herself thinking not of the dinner ahead, but of the Lakota camp somewhere beyond Pine Creek. What would happen to Elijah there? Would they treat him with the same measured respect Two Rivers had shown during the fight, or would he face harsher treatment out of sight of white witnesses? The green dress, her mother's, altered like most of her better clothing, felt tight. Around her ribs, the style several years out of date even by Pine Creek standards. Rebecca studied her reflection in the small mirror. wondering what Jonathan Thompson would see, a frontier shopkeeper's daughter with calloused hands and sun-freckled skin, or merely a potential wife, interchangeable with any other respectable young woman. Precisely at 6, Reverend Thompson arrived with his nephew. Jonathan Thompson was younger than Rebecca had expected, perhaps 25, with wire-rimmed spectacles and a scholarly stoop to his shoulders. His handshake was brief and clammy when Walter introduced them. "Miss Miller," he acknowledged with a nod that seemed more nervous than aloof. "A pleasure to make your acquaintance." Rebecca murmured an appropriate response, leading them to the small dining table she had prepared in their living quarters. The conversation through dinner followed predictable paths. Jonathan's journey west, his seminary studies, his impressions of the frontier, delivered with the carefully measured criticism of someone trying not to offend while clearly finding much to disapprove of. "I understand there was some excitement in town today," Reverend Thompson mentioned, as they finished the apple cobbler Rebecca had prepared. "A most unfortunate business with Cooper and those Indians." "Better than a shooting war," Walter replied. "And Cooper's been nothing but trouble for years. Still, to allow a white man, however fallen, to be taken by savages." The Reverend shook his head. "It sets a dangerous precedent." Jonathan cleared his throat. "I observed some of the proceedings from a distance. The Indian leader, Two Rivers, was it? Conducted himself with surprising dignity." Rebecca looked up sharply, meeting Jonathan's eyes for perhaps the first time that evening. "You were there?" He adjusted his spectacles, clearly uncomfortable with her direct gaze. "Merely as an observer. I've had some academic interest in native customs, from a missionary perspective, of course." "Of course," Rebecca echoed, studying him with new interest. "And what did you observe?" Jonathan glanced at his uncle, who frowned slightly. "Well, the physical contest was rather one-sided, as one might expect, but there was a certain protocol to the proceedings that suggested their culture is not entirely without structure." "How fascinating," Rebecca said, meaning it. "Have you studied many Indian tribes?" "Only through books and journals," Jonathan admitted. "My professors at the seminary believe understanding native ways is essential to the conversion process." The conversation shifted to Jonathan's missionary aspirations, but Rebecca's impression of him had subtly altered. Though still clearly a product of Eastern sensibilities, he possessed a curiosity about the world that distinguished him from others she'd met. After dinner, Walter suggested Rebecca show Jonathan the view from the small balcony above the store, a transparent attempt to provide them with a chaperoned but semi-private moment. The evening air had cooled slightly, bringing relief from the day's heat. Rebecca and Jonathan stood side by side, looking out over Pine Creek's main street, where a few lamps now glowed in windows. "It must seem very primitive to you," Rebecca said after a moment of awkward silence. "After Boston." Jonathan considered before responding. "Different, certainly, but not without its merits. There's a directness here. In Boston, everything is layers of politeness concealing true intentions." "We have our own kinds of concealment," Rebecca replied, "our own rules about what can be said and done." He glanced at her, surprise evident in his expression. "You're not what I expected, Miss Miller." Rebecca raised an eyebrow. "What did you expect?" Jonathan flushed slightly. "Someone less. Thoughtful, perhaps. My uncle described you as a dutiful daughter and skilled homemaker." "High praise indeed," Rebecca said dryly before she could stop herself. To her surprise, Jonathan laughed, as a genuine sound that transformed his scholarly features. "My apologies, that was poorly phrased." He turned to face her more directly. "What I meant was that you seem to have ideas of your own, opinions that might not align perfectly with frontier conventions." Rebecca studied him cautiously. "Is that disapproval I hear, Mr. Thompson?" Not at all. He adjusted his spectacles again, a nervous habit she'd noticed throughout dinner. Merely observation. I find independent thought refreshing even when, perhaps especially when, it challenges established views. Before Rebecca could respond, Walter called them back inside. The evening concluded with polite farewells and a clear indication from both older men that further meetings would be arranged. After the Thompsons departed, Walter looked at Rebecca expectantly. "Well, what did you think of him?" Rebecca considered her response carefully. "He seems more open-minded than I anticipated." Walter nodded, apparently satisfied with this lukewarm assessment. "The Reverend says he's considering a permanent position here once the new church is built. A man of education and faith would be an excellent match." Rebecca began clearing the dishes, using the activity to mask her expression. "It's early days yet, Father. We've only just met." Of course," Walter agreed, his tone suggesting the conclusion was nevertheless foregone. "But these arrangements take time, and you're not getting any younger." The familiar refrain stung no less for its repetition. Rebecca focused on washing the dishes, her mind drifting once again to the Lakota camp and what might be happening there. The contrast between her constrained existence and Elijah's forced journey into an entirely different world struck her anew. Which of them was truly the prisoner? Days passed with no word of Elijah Cooper. The excitement of the fight faded, replaced by the regular rhythms of Pine Creek life. Rebecca met Jonathan Thompson twice more, once for a Sunday afternoon walk, once for tea at the Reverend's house. Each encounter revealed more of his thoughtful nature, his genuine interest in ideas beyond the narrow confines of frontier theology. Still, Rebecca felt no spark, no particular anticipation at seeing him again. He represented a comfortable, respectable future, perhaps even an intellectually stimulating one. But something essential was missing. "He asked permission to write to you while he's in Deadwood," Walter informed her one evening, 2 weeks after the Thompsons' arrival. "The Reverend's sending him to assess the need for missionary work there." Rebecca looked up from her mending. "He did?" Walter nodded, clearly pleased. "A formal correspondence is an important step. You should compose a suitable reply before he leaves tomorrow." The thought of Jonathan's absence produced neither disappointment nor relief in Rebecca, merely a neutral acknowledgement of changed circumstances. That night, she struggled to compose an appropriate letter. Every phrase felt forced, every sentiment artificial. In the end, she wrote a brief, polite note, expressing appreciation for his interest and wishing him a productive journey. If Walter found it lacking in warmth when he reviewed it the next morning, he made no comment. Jonathan departed on the morning stage, promising to return within 3 weeks. Life in Pine Creek continued, the hot days of late summer giving way to the first hints of autumn coolness. It was during this quiet period that the first rumors began to circulate. Travelers passing through reported seeing Elijah Cooper with a Lakota hunting party near Devil's Tower. According to their accounts, he rode alongside the warriors, dressed partially in native garments, appearing neither prisoner nor captive, but something in between. Probably Stockholm Syndrome, Dr. Grant pronounced when the subject arose at his office where Rebecca was collecting her father's arthritis tonic. Seen it in captivity cases before, the mind adapts to survive. Or maybe he's finding something there he couldn't find here, Rebecca suggested, earning a surprised look from the doctor. "Miss Miller, surely you don't approve of a white man adopting savage ways?" Rebecca secured the bottle of tonic in her basket. "I merely suggest that different doesn't automatically mean worse, Dr. Grant." The doctor's bushy eyebrows rose nearly to his hairline. "Careful with such radical thoughts, young lady. People might get the wrong idea." As Rebecca left the doctor's office, she spotted an unfamiliar rider approaching from the east, a solitary figure on a dappled grey horse. Her heart quickened as the rider drew closer and she recognized the distinctive eagle feather. Thomas Two Rivers rode slowly down Pine Creek's main street, his expression impassive as townspeople stopped to stare. He wore a blue cotton shirt with buckskin trousers, a mixture of white and native clothing that somehow emphasized rather than diminished his otherness. Rebecca stood frozen outside the doctor's office, her basket clutched tightly as Two Rivers approached. To her shock, he reined his horse to a stop directly before her. "Miss Miller," he greeted her, his deep voice carrying in the sudden quiet of the street. Rebecca swallowed, acutely aware of watching eyes. "Mr. Two Rivers, is Elijah well?" A flicker of something approval. "Respect?" crossed his features. "He is changing, learning. He asked me to bring word to his mother that he is safe." Rebecca nodded, relieved. Mrs. Cooper, a widow who lived on the outskirts of town, had been nearly as ostracized as her son in recent years. "I'll make sure she receives the message." Two Rivers studied her for a moment longer than was comfortable. "You spoke for him that day. Why?" The directness of the question caught her off guard. I believe everyone deserves a chance at redemption, even a drunk who most had given up on. Especially him," Rebecca replied with a conviction that surprised her. Two Rivers nodded slowly. "The Lakota have a saying, a person who helps others without thinking of themselves finds the true path." He reached into a small pouch at his waist and withdrew something, extending his hand toward her. "Elijah made this. He said you would understand its meaning." Rebecca hesitantly accepted the small object, a wooden carving no larger than her palm. It depicted an eagle in flight, wings outstretched, each feather intricately detailed despite the small scale. The craftsmanship was remarkable, revealing a talent she'd never known Elijah possessed. "It's beautiful," she said softly, "but I don't understand freedom." Two Rivers said simply, "The eagle flies where it chooses, answerable only to the wind and sky." He gathered his reins. "Elijah is finding his wings again. Perhaps you will find yours as well." Rebecca Miller. Without waiting for a response, he nudged his horse forward, continuing down the street toward Mrs. Cooper's small house at the edge of town. Rebecca stood rooted in place, the carved eagle warm in her palm, the implications of Two Rivers' words echoing in her mind. How had he sensed her own captivity, her own longing for something beyond Pine Creek's boundaries? And how had Elijah, a man she barely knew, recognized that same yearning in her? She slipped the carving into her pocket before anyone could question its nature, but its weight against her hip remained a tangible reminder of possibilities she'd almost stopped believing. That evening, Walter noticed her distraction as they closed the store. "I heard that Indian came back today," he remarked, his tone carefully neutral. "Causing trouble?" "No," Rebecca replied. "Just bringing word to Mrs. Cooper that her son is well." Walter snorted. "Small comfort. That boy broke his mother's heart long before the Indians took him." "People can change, Father." Rebecca adjusted a display of canned goods, avoiding his gaze. "Some can, most don't." Walter locked the cash drawer with finality. "Speaking of changes, Reverend Thompson mentioned that Jonathan has written to him from Deadwood. Seems he's quite taken with you." Rebecca concentrated on aligning the cans perfectly. "That's flattering." "It's more than that," Walter corrected. "It's an opportunity for security, for a respectable future." He paused. "I won't live forever, Rebecca. The store provides a living, but it's not enough to secure your position without the protection of a husband." The carved eagle seemed to grow heavier in her pocket. "And if I want something different?" Walter's expression hardened. "Different how? What exactly do you imagine for yourself out here? This isn't Boston with its women's colleges and literary societies. This is the frontier, where survival depends on knowing your place and fulfilling your role. And my role is to marry whoever offers first." Rebecca challenged, the words escaping before she could reconsider. Her father stared at her, genuinely perplexed. Jonathan Thompson is educated, respectable, and genuinely interested in you. Most young women would consider themselves fortunate. I'm not most young women, Rebecca said quietly. Walter's face darkened. No, you're becoming something I don't recognize. Ever since that business with Cooper and the Indians, you've been different, questioning things that aren't meant to be questioned. Rebecca turned away, unwilling to escalate the confrontation further. That night, she placed the carved eagle on her windowsill, its wings catching the moonlight. Her thoughts drifted to Elijah among the Lakota, learning their ways, finding perhaps a kind of peace that had eluded him in Pine Creek. And to Thomas Two Rivers, whose brief interactions with her had somehow cut through years of accumulated certainty about her place and purpose. Sleep came fitfully, dreams filled with images of eagles soaring above pine-covered hills, of horses running free across open plains, and of a path leading away from Pine Creek toward distant horizons. She couldn't quite make out. The next morning dawned cool and clear, the first real hint of autumn in the air. Rebecca opened the store as usual, greeting early customers with practiced courtesy, while her mind remained occupied with the previous day's encounter. Mid-morning, the bell above the door jingled. Rebecca looked up from the ledger to find Mrs. Cooper standing hesitantly at the threshold. The older woman rarely came to town anymore, preferring to have necessities delivered to her small homestead. "Mrs. Cooper," Rebecca greeted her warmly. "Please come in." Elijah's mother stepped inside, her worn shawl pulled tight around thin shoulders despite the mild weather. "Miss Miller," she acknowledged with a nod, "I heard you might have news of my son." Rebecca glanced around the empty store before responding. "Mr. Two Rivers visited yesterday. He said Elijah is well and learning their ways." Relief softened the deep lines of Mrs. Cooper's face. "Thank you for telling me. No one else would." Would you like some tea?" Rebecca offered impulsively. "I was just about to make some for myself." The older woman hesitated, then nodded. "That would be kind." In the small kitchen behind the store, Rebecca prepared 2 cups, while Mrs. Cooper sat at the worn table, her gnarled hands resting in her lap. "People say he's turned Indian," Mrs. Cooper said abruptly, "that he's forgotten he's a white man." Rebecca placed a steaming cup before her. "I think he's finding himself again, Mrs. Cooper, whatever that means." The older woman's eyes, faded blue like her son's, studied Rebecca with sudden intensity. "You defended him. Thomas Two Rivers told me how you spoke up when no one else would." Rebecca felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I only suggested there might be another way to resolve the situation." "Why?" Mrs. Cooper asked plainly. "Elijah's been nothing but trouble for years. Most folks wrote him off long ago." Rebecca considered the question carefully. "I remember him from before, how he used to be, and I think sometimes people just need someone to believe they can be that person again." Mrs. Cooper's weathered hand covered Rebecca's briefly, a gesture of unexpected connection. "You're a good girl, Rebecca Miller. Too good for this town, if you ask me." The conversation with Mrs. Cooper lingered in Rebecca's thoughts for days afterward. There was something freeing about the older woman's perspective, shaped by hardship, yet unclouded by the social pretensions that governed so much of Pine Creek society. September brought subtle changes to Pine Creek. The relentless heat gave way to cooler mornings. Gold seekers began filtering back from the hills, some triumphant with small fortunes, others defeated and empty-handed. The store grew busier as people prepared for the coming winter, and Rebecca found herself working longer hours, which provided a convenient excuse to avoid further social engagements. Jonathan Thompson had written twice from Deadwood. Formal, carefully composed letters describing his missionary work among the miners and requesting permission to continue their correspondence. Rebecca replied with equally proper but non-committal responses, fulfilling the expected social convention while revealing little of herself. 3 weeks after Two Rivers' visit, the first autumn storm rolled in from the west. Dark clouds gathered throughout the morning, and by noon, fat raindrops pelted the store's windows. By closing time, the storm had intensified, wind driving the rain sideways and turning the town's single street into a river of mud. "No sense in both of us getting soaked," Walter said as they prepared to close. "I'll make the bank deposit. You finish up here." Rebecca nodded, grateful for the rare moment of solitude that his absence would provide. After he left, hunched against the downpour, she completed the day's ledger entries and swept the floor, enjoying the rhythmic sound of rain against the roof. The knock at the side door startled her. Customers usually used the front entrance, and Walter would simply walk in. Cautiously, Rebecca approached the door, calling out, "Who's there?" "It's Elijah Cooper, Miss Miller." Rebecca froze, her hand halfway to the latch. For a moment, she thought she'd misheard, that the storm had played tricks with the sound. But when the knock came again, more insistent, she knew. She opened the door to find Elijah standing in the rain, water streaming from a wide-brimmed hat that hadn't been part of his wardrobe before. He wore buckskin leggings beneath a long coat of rough wool, and his beard had been trimmed to a neat length. But it was his eyes that captured Rebecca's attention, clear blue, steady, without the bloodshot haze or unfocused gaze she'd grown accustomed to seeing. They were the eyes of the young man from before the war, though now set in a face marked by experience and hardship. "Mr. Cooper," she managed, stepping back, "please come in out of the rain." He removed his hat as he entered, revealing hair cut shorter than the Lakota style, but longer than Pine Creek's current fashion. "I apologize for coming to the side door," he said, his voice stronger and more assured than she remembered. "I thought it best to avoid the main street for now." Rebecca closed the door behind him, suddenly aware of the impropriety of being alone with him in the store. Yet the thought felt distant and unimportant compared to the astonishing reality of his transformation. "You're back early," she said, moving to put the counter between them, a gesture toward propriety. "The month isn't complete." Elijah nodded, remaining respectfully near the door. Two Rivers felt I'd learned what I needed to, and with winter coming, it was time for their band to move toward their winter grounds. Rebecca noticed he stood straighter, his shoulders no longer hunched defensively. Even his speech had changed, deliberate and clear, without the slurred edges or defensive tone she'd grown accustomed to hearing. "Your mother will be relieved," she said. "She's been worried." A shadow crossed Elijah's face. "I've already been to see her. She's the one who suggested I come here next." He hesitated. "To thank you properly for what you did that day." Rebecca felt her cheeks warm. "I didn't do anything special." "You stood up when no one else would," Elijah countered. "You suggested another way when everyone was set on conflict." He reached into his coat and withdrew something wrapped in soft leather. "I wanted you to have this. I made it during my time with the Lakota." Hesitantly, Rebecca accepted the package. When she unwrapped it, she found a small dream catcher, intricately woven from sinew and adorned with beads and a single eagle feather. "It's beautiful," she said softly, running her finger along the delicate webbing. "Two Rivers taught me to make them," Elijah explained. "They catch the bad dreams and let only the good ones through." His eyes met hers. "You brought good dreams back into my life when all I had were nightmares, Miss Miller." The sincerity in his voice left Rebecca momentarily speechless. Before she could formulate a response, the front door opened with a gust of wind and rain. Walter Miller stopped, dead at the sight of Elijah, his expression darkening from surprise to suspicion in an instant. "Cooper, what are you doing in my store?" Elijah straightened, facing Rebecca's father squarely. "Sir, I came to thank Miss Miller for her kindness and to let her know I've returned." Walter's gaze shifted to the dream catcher in Rebecca's hands, then back to Elijah with increased disapproval. "I see. Well, you've delivered your message. Now I suggest you leave before people get the wrong idea." "Father," Rebecca protested, "Mr. Cooper was just—" "I know exactly what Cooper was just doing," Walter cut her off, "and it's highly inappropriate for him to be here alone with you." Elijah retrieved his hat, his face composed despite the obvious dismissal. "You're right, Mr. Miller. I apologize for any impropriety." He turned to Rebecca, his voice formal, but his eyes conveying more than his words. "Thank you again, Miss Miller." He nodded respectfully to Walter before stepping back into the rain, pulling his hat low over his face as the door closed behind him. Walter rounded on Rebecca immediately. "What were you thinking? Letting that man in here, accepting gifts from him? Do you have any idea what people would say if they knew?" Rebecca carefully rewrapped the dream catcher in its leather covering. "He wanted to thank me, that's all. And look at him, Father. He's changed." "Changed?" Walter scoffed. "Because he cut his hair and isn't visibly drunk? A month with savages doesn't erase years of disgrace, and now he's brought their pagan trinkets into my store. It's a gift of gratitude," Rebecca said firmly, tucking the wrapped dream catcher into her apron pocket. "And there's nothing pagan about it." Walter stared at her as if seeing a stranger. "Put that thing in the stove before anyone sees it. I won't have my daughter associated with Cooper or his Indian friends." For the first time in her life, Rebecca felt a flush of genuine anger toward her father. "No." The single word hung between them, as startling to Rebecca as it clearly was to Walter. "What did you say to me?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Rebecca took a deep breath. "I said no. The dream catcher was a gift, made with skill and given in gratitude. I won't destroy it." Walter's face reddened, but before he could respond, the front door opened again, admitting a drenched Sheriff Parker. "Walter," he nodded, then tipped his hat to Rebecca. "Miss Miller, sorry to intrude, but I saw Cooper leaving your side door. Everything all right?" Walter's expression tightened further. "Cooper came to bother my daughter. I sent him on his way." "He didn't bother me," Rebecca objected. "He came to express gratitude, that's all." The sheriff looked between them, clearly sensing the tension. "Well, either way, thought you should know there's talk already. Mrs. Henderson saw him skulking around the side of your building and has been telling anyone who'll listen." Walter closed his eyes briefly, as if gathering patience. "Of course she did. Thank you for letting us know, James." After the sheriff departed, Walter fixed Rebecca with a stern gaze. "This is exactly what I was afraid of. Your reputation—" "My reputation," Rebecca interrupted, surprising herself with her boldness. "Is that all that matters? Not whether I'm happy or fulfilled or doing what's right?" "Those are luxuries, Rebecca," Walter replied with exasperation. "Reputation is the currency of survival out here, especially for a woman. Without it, you have nothing." Rebecca touched the outline of the dream catcher in her pocket. "There are worse things than having nothing." Walter studied her for a long moment, then sighed heavily. "This new attitude of yours, I blame myself. I've been too lenient, allowed you too much independence. That changes now." "What do you mean?" Rebecca asked, a chill running through her that had nothing to do with the storm outside. "I mean that Jonathan Thompson returns from Deadwood next week. I intend to accept his offer for your hand when he does." Rebecca stared at him in disbelief. "His offer? He hasn't made one. He wrote to me specifically requesting permission to court you with marriage in mind," Walter stated flatly. "I've decided to give it." "Without consulting me?" Rebecca's voice rose despite her efforts to remain calm. Don't I have any say in my own future? Walter ran a hand through his rain-dampened hair, his expression a mixture of frustration and what might have been genuine concern. Rebecca, listen to me. You're 23 years old in a town where most women are married by 18. Jonathan is educated, respectable, and willing to overlook your growing eccentricities. He'll provide security that I cannot guarantee forever. And if I refuse? Rebecca challenged, though her heart pounded at her own audacity. Walter's expression hardened. Then you leave me no choice but to send you to your aunt in St. Louis. Perhaps she can instill the proper sense of a woman's place that I have clearly failed to. The threat struck Rebecca like a physical blow. Aunt Harriet was her mother's older sister, a stern widow who viewed the smallest deviation from social propriety as a moral failing. Life under her roof would be even more constrained than in Pine Creek. You wouldn't, Rebecca whispered. I would, Walter confirmed, his tone leaving no room for doubt. For your own good. The stage leaves on Thursday. You have until then to decide. He retreated to his office, leaving Rebecca standing in the silent store, the rain drumming against the windows like a mournful accompaniment to her thoughts. That night, sleep eluded her. Rebecca placed the dream catcher above her bed, its delicate webbing catching the occasional flashes of lightning that illuminated her small room. The decision before her seemed impossible. A marriage based on convenience and her father's approval, or banishment to a life of even greater restriction in St. Louis. Neither option offered the freedom she craved, the chance to determine her own path, yet what alternatives existed for a woman alone on the frontier? Morning brought no clarity, only a leaden sky that matched Rebecca's mood. The rain had stopped, leaving Pine Creek transformed into a muddy obstacle course that few customers bothered to navigate. The store remained quiet, the silence between Rebecca and her father speaking volumes. By afternoon, word of Elijah Cooper's return had spread throughout town, embellished with each retelling. According to Mrs. Wilson, who stopped by ostensibly to purchase thread, Elijah had gone completely native, living in a teepee and participating in heathen ceremonies. And now he's back, bold as brass, Mrs. Wilson concluded, her eyes gleaming with the pleasure of delivering fresh gossip. Sheriff Parker says he's reopening the old blacksmith shop, can you imagine? As if decent folk would patronize a man who chose Indians over his own kind. Rebecca measured out the requested thread, keeping her expression carefully neutral. Perhaps he's simply trying to rebuild his life, Mrs. Wilson. The older woman's eyes narrowed. There are some things a person can't come back from, Rebecca. Choosing to live among savages is one of them. She leaned closer across the counter. And I heard he paid you a visit yesterday. Most improper, if you don't mind my saying so. Mr. Cooper came to thank me for a small kindness, Rebecca replied, evenly. Nothing more. Mrs. Wilson's expression made it clear she didn't believe this innocent explanation. Well, you'd best be careful, dear. A young woman's reputation is fragile, especially with Reverend Thompson's nephew showing such interest in you. After Mrs. Wilson departed, Walter emerged from the storeroom where he'd clearly been listening. You see, he said quietly, this is exactly what I was concerned about. Association with Cooper puts everything at risk. Your standing, your future prospects. Rebecca continued, straightening merchandise, avoiding her father's gaze. Mrs. Wilson would gossip about a fence post if there was nothing else to discuss. Perhaps, Walter conceded. But perception becomes reality in a place like this. You know that as well as I do. The rest of the day passed in tense silence. As closing time approached, Walter donned his coat. I'm going to the town council meeting, don't wait up. When he was gone, Rebecca sank onto a stool behind the counter, the weight of her situation pressing down upon her. Thursday loomed just 2 days away, the deadline for a decision that would determine the course of her entire life. The bell above the door jingled unexpectedly. Rebecca looked up to find Mrs. Cooper standing there, her thin frame wrapped in a shawl, despite the muggy aftermath of the storm. "Mrs. Cooper," Rebecca greeted her, managing a smile. "Can I help you with something?" The older woman approached. The counter, her movements deliberate. "Not with merchandise, child. I came to speak with you directly." She glanced around the empty store. "Is your father about?" "Town council meeting," Rebecca explained. "We're technically closed, but please, sit down." She gestured to a chair near the counter. Mrs. Cooper settled herself with a sigh. Elijah told me what happened yesterday. Your father sending him away, the sheriff getting involved." Rebecca flushed. "I'm sorry about that. My father is concerned about appearances." "Most are," Mrs. Cooper acknowledged without rancor. "But sometimes appearances matter less than what's right." She studied Rebecca intently. "My boys changed, Miss Miller, really changed. Not just the drinking, though he hasn't touched a drop since he left with those Lakota. It's deeper than that." "I noticed," Rebecca said softly. "He seems at peace somehow." Mrs. Cooper nodded, a mother's pride softening her weathered features. "That's it exactly. Whatever he found out there with those people, it healed something the war broke inside him." Her expression grew more serious. "But not everyone will see it that way. Already folks are avoiding him, whispering behind his back." "That's unfair," Rebecca protested. "He deserves a chance to rebuild his life." "Life isn't fair, child, especially out here." Mrs. Cooper leaned forward slightly. "But that's not why I came. Elijah told me about the ultimatum your father gave you." Rebecca stared at her in surprise. "How did he know about that?" "This town has more ears than a cornfield," Mrs. Cooper replied with a shrug. "And your father's voice carries when he's upset." She reached across the counter to pat Rebecca's hand. "You remind me of myself at your age. Too many thoughts in your head for most people's comfort." Rebecca felt a sudden kinship with this woman who had endured so much, yet maintained her dignity. "What did you do?" "I married a man I thought would give me freedom," Mrs. Cooper said with a sad smile. "James Cooper was handsome and wild and promised me the world beyond my father's farm. For a while, we had it, traveling west, seeing things most people only read about." Her eyes grew distant. "Then the drink got hold of him, same as it did Elijah after the war. Dreams turned to dust, and freedom became another kind of cage." Rebecca absorbed this unexpected confidence, seeing parallels to her own situation. "I don't know what to do," she admitted. "Neither choice feels right." Mrs. Cooper squeezed her hand gently. "There's always another path, child, if you're brave enough to look for it." She reached into her shawl and withdrew a folded piece of paper. "Elijah asked me to give you this. Whatever you decide, he wanted you to have it." Rebecca accepted the folded note, uncertainty warring with curiosity. "I don't understand." "Read it when you're alone," Mrs. Cooper advised, rising from her chair. "And remember that sometimes the hardest path is the one that leads to where you truly belong." With those cryptic words, she departed, leaving Rebecca holding the folded paper as if it might contain either salvation or danger. That night, in the privacy of her room, Rebecca finally unfolded Elijah's note. The handwriting was neater than she expected, the words carefully chosen. "Miss Miller, what I couldn't say in your father's store, I write here with the hope it reaches your eyes alone. My time with the Lakota taught me many things, but the most important was this. True freedom comes not from the absence of obligation, but from the courage to follow one's own heart, despite what others may think. You stood for me when I couldn't stand for myself. Now I would stand for you if you'll allow it. 2 rivers and several families are departing for the Western Territories in 3 days' time. I've decided to go with them. There's talk of good land near the mountains, far from the troubles brewing here between miners and Indians. A place where a man might start fresh, judged by his actions rather than his past. If you find yourself seeking a different path than the one laid before, you meet me at the Old Oak by Cooper Creek at dawn on Thursday. No obligation, no expectations. Just the opportunity to choose your own way forward. Whatever you decide, know that your kindness changed the course of my life, and for that I will always be grateful. With deepest respect, Elijah Cooper. Rebecca read the note 3 times, her heart racing with each reading. What Elijah proposed was beyond radical. It was the stuff of scandalous penny novels and cautionary tales told to keep young women firmly within society's boundaries. Yet beneath the shock lay a quiet recognition, a sense that perhaps this was the alternative path she'd been seeking without knowing it existed. She tucked the note beneath her pillow and lay awake long into the night, weighing possibilities, consequences, and the true meaning of freedom. Wednesday dawned clear and cool, the storm having washed away both dust and heat. Rebecca moved through her daily routine mechanically, her mind occupied with the choice that now lay before her: marriage to Jonathan Thompson, exile to Aunt Harriet in St. Louis, or the unthinkable third option presented in Elijah's note. Walter seemed to sense her distraction, but misinterpreted its cause. "I know this is difficult," he said over breakfast, his tone softer than it had been in days. "But I truly believe I'm acting in your best interest, Rebecca." She nodded, unable to meet his eyes, for fear he might read the tumult of her thoughts. "I understand, Father." "Jonathan will be back on Friday," Walter continued. "I thought perhaps you might prepare a special dinner to welcome him. Show him what an accomplished hostess you can be." The assumption that she would choose marriage over St. Louis was evident in his tone. Rebecca murmured non-committal agreement, guilt settling in her stomach like a stone at the deception. Throughout the day, she found small excuses to set aside items she might need: an extra shawl tucked beneath the counter, her mother's locket slipped into her apron pocket, a small amount of money from the day's earnings that wouldn't immediately be missed from the ledger. Each action carried the weight of decision, moving her incrementally toward a choice she still wasn't certain she could make. By closing time, an uneasy calm had settled between father and daughter. Walter even smiled as they finished the day's accounting. "I've been hard on you, I know," he acknowledged. "But when Jonathan returns, I think you'll see that I've secured a good future for you." Rebecca swallowed past the lump in her throat. "You've always tried to do what's best for me." Something in her tone must have alerted him. Walter studied her face with sudden intensity. "Rebecca, you haven't decided on St. Louis, have you?" "No," she said truthfully. "Not St. Louis." Relief softened his features. "Good. That's good." He patted her hand awkwardly. "You'll see. In time, you'll thank me for this." That night, Rebecca packed a small bag with only the essentials: a change of clothes, her mother's Bible, the carved eagle and dream catcher, and the small amount of money she'd set aside. Everything else, the store, her father's plans, Pine Creek itself, she forced herself to mentally release, though the process felt like tearing roots from soil. As she lay in bed, sleep elusive, she wondered if she was making a terrible mistake. Elijah Cooper, for all his remarkable transformation, remained a man she barely knew. The path he offered led into uncertainty, perhaps even danger. Was she truly prepared to leave everything familiar for such a nebulous promise of freedom? Yet when she imagined the alternative, years stretching before her as Mrs. Jonathan Thompson, bound by the same social constraints that had always chafed, or, worse, Withering under Aunt Harriet's critical eye in St. Louis, she felt a constriction in her chest that made it difficult to breathe. Outside her window, the stars wheeled across the sky, marking the passage of hours. Sleep came in fitful bursts, disturbed by dreams of pursuit and confusion. When the first grey light of dawn appeared on the horizon, Rebecca was already awake. Her decision crystallized in the quiet hours of night. She dressed quickly in her sturdiest clothes, a brown wool skirt, cotton blouse, and leather boots she used for garden work. Over these, she added a shawl against the morning chill. The small bag she'd packed seemed simultaneously too little to start a new life and too much evidence of her intentions. In the kitchen, she paused long enough to write a brief note to her father. The words came with difficulty. How to explain a decision she herself didn't fully understand. In the end, she kept it simple. Dear Father, by the time you read this, I will be gone. Please know that this choice comes not from lack of love for you, but from the need to find my own way in the world. I cannot marry Jonathan, nor can I accept exile to St. Louis. There is another path I must follow, wherever it may lead. I am safe and not alone. Please don't worry or search for me. When I am settled, I will write. With love always, Rebecca. She placed the note on the kitchen table, weighed down by the salt cellar. For a moment, she stood listening to her father's familiar snores from his bedroom, fighting the impulse to tear up the note, unpack her bag, and accept the future he had planned. Instead, she slipped out the side door into the pre-dawn stillness, carefully latching it behind her. Pine Creek lay silent around her, buildings dark shapes against the gradually lightening sky. She kept to the shadows as she made her way out of town, fear of discovery making her heart race with each creak of a shutter or distant barking of a dog. Only when the last building fell behind her did Rebecca allow herself to breathe more easily. The road to Cooper Creek stretched before her, a pale ribbon in the grey light. She quickened her pace, aware that dawn approached, and with it the possibility of being seen by early risers. Cooper Creek lay 2 miles outside town, a modest stream bordered by cottonwoods, and at one particular bend, a massive oak that had served as a landmark for generations. As Rebecca approached, she could make out a solitary figure standing beside, a horse, the silhouette unmistakable even in the dim light. Elijah straightened as she drew near, surprise and something like hope crossing his features. "Miss Miller, I wasn't sure you'd come." Rebecca stopped a few feet away, suddenly aware of the enormity of what she was doing. "Neither was I," she admitted. "Until this morning." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "It's not too late to change your mind. I can take you back before anyone wakes." The offer, with its clear lack of pressure, paradoxically strengthened Rebecca's resolve. "No," she said with more certainty. "I've made my choice." Elijah studied her for a moment longer, then smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his features. "Then we should go. 2 Rivers and the others are camped several miles north, prepared to leave at first light." He helped her onto his horse, then mounted behind her, maintaining a respectful distance despite the shared saddle. As they rode away from Pine Creek, the sun crested the eastern horizon, painting the landscape in gold and promise. Rebecca didn't look back. The weight that had pressed upon her chest for so long seemed to lift with each hoofbeat, replaced by a curious blend of terror and exhilaration. She had no illusions that the path ahead would be easy, but for the first time in memory, it was truly her own. They rode in companionable silence until the sun had fully risen. Finally, Rebecca asked the question that had been forming in her mind since reading Elijah's note. "Why did you offer this to me? You barely know me." Elijah was quiet for a moment before responding. "Among the Lakota, There's a belief that some spirits are connected across time and distance. Two Rivers calls it recognizing a fellow traveler on the sacred path. His voice softened. When you stood up for me that day, when no one else would, I recognized something in you that matched something in me, a hunger for more than what Pine Creek offered. And you think I'll find that with the Lakota? Rebecca asked, genuine curiosity in her tone. Maybe, Elijah acknowledged, or maybe somewhere else entirely. Two Rivers plans to establish a new settlement near the mountains, not just Lakota, but anyone seeking a different way of living. Some white traders, a few families from other tribes, people looking to start fresh. He paused. The point isn't where we end up, Miss Miller. It's that we have the freedom to choose. As they crested a hill, Rebecca could see smoke from campfires. In the distance, the small shapes of teepees and horses indicating the Lakota encampment. A figure separated from the group, riding toward them at an unhurried pace. Even at a distance, Rebecca recognized Thomas Two Rivers, his straight-backed posture and single eagle feather distinctive against the morning sky. "What will they think of me coming along?" she asked, suddenly uncertain of her welcome. "They will see what I see," Elijah replied with quiet confidence, a woman of courage following her own path. As Two Rivers drew nearer, Rebecca noticed he led a second horse, a dappled mare with a blanket saddle. He raised a hand in greeting, his expression revealing nothing of his thoughts at finding Rebecca with Elijah. "You have chosen to join us," he stated simply when they met, his eyes assessing Rebecca without judgment. Rebecca nodded, finding her voice. "If I am welcome." Two Rivers gestured to the mare beside him. "This one has been waiting for a rider who knows her own mind." His stern features softened slightly. "The journey ahead is not easy, Rebecca Miller. There will be hardships and choices that test your strength." "I understand," Rebecca replied, though in truth she could only imagine the challenges that lay ahead. Two Rivers seemed to read her thoughts. "No, you do not yet understand, but you will learn." He handed her the mare's reins. "For now, it is enough that you have taken the first step on your own path." As Rebecca transferred to the mare's back, feeling the unfamiliar movement of the animal beneath her, she caught sight of distant dust on the road behind them. A single rider pushing his horse hard, coming from the direction of Pine Creek. Her heart clenched with sudden fear. "Someone's coming," she said, pointing. Elijah and Two Rivers turned, watching the approaching rider with narrowed eyes. "Your father?" Elijah asked quietly. Rebecca shook her head. "The store wouldn't be open yet. He wouldn't have found my note." As the rider drew closer, his identity became clear. Sheriff Parker, his badge catching the morning light, rode toward them at a gallop. "Cooper!" he called, while still some distance away. "Hold up there!" Two Rivers turned to Rebecca. "You can still return if that is your wish." The moment stretched between them, possibility and choice hanging in the balance. Rebecca glanced from Two Rivers to Elijah, then back to the approaching sheriff. In that instant, she knew with absolute clarity that whatever lay ahead, she could not go back to the life she'd left behind. "No," she said firmly, "I've made my decision." Two Rivers nodded once, then turned his horse to face the sheriff, Elijah moving to flank him. Rebecca guided her mare to position herself alongside them. Three figures united against whatever came next. Sheriff Parker reined his horse to a stop several yards away, dust settling around him as he surveyed the three figures before him. His hand rested casually near his holster, though he made no move to draw his weapon. "Miss Miller," he said, his voice carrying clear surprise despite his effort to maintain official composure. "Your father is half out of his mind with worry, found your note not 30 minutes ago, and came straight to me." Rebecca sat straighter on her mare, willing her voice to remain steady. "I left a note explaining my decision, Sheriff. I'm of age and leaving of my own free will." Parker's weathered face creased with concern. "Rebecca, think about what you're doing. Running off with—" He gestured toward Elijah and 2 Rivers. "With these men. It's not just improper, it's dangerous. The only danger Miss Miller faces is returning to a life that is not of her choosing." 2 Rivers stated calmly. The sheriff's expression hardened. "I wasn't addressing you, Indian." "But he's right," Rebecca interjected before tensions could escalate. "Sheriff Parker, please understand. I cannot marry Jonathan Thompson. I cannot be the person my father wants me to be." "So instead you'll become what? A squaw? The companion?" "Of a man who until recently couldn't stay sober from sunup to sundown." Parker shook his head in disbelief. "Your father's right. You're not thinking clearly." Elijah moved his horse slightly forward. "Sheriff, Rebecca is making her own choice. No one is forcing or coercing her." "That's so." Parker's eyes narrowed. "Then you won't mind if I speak with her alone?" 2 Rivers and Elijah exchanged glances. "That seems reasonable," 2 Rivers said, nodding to Rebecca. "We will wait just over that rise." As they moved their horses a respectful distance away, Sheriff Parker guided his mount closer to Rebecca's. His expression softened to something almost paternal. "Rebecca, I've known you since you were knee-high to a grasshopper. Your mother would be heartbroken to see this." He gestured toward the retreating figures. "Whatever notions you have about freedom or adventure, they're not worth throwing away your whole future." Rebecca met his gaze steadily. "And what future is that, Sheriff? Marriage to a man I barely know? A life confined by what others deem appropriate for a woman? That's not living, it's existing." "Life on the frontier is hard enough with the protection of society," Parker countered. "Out there, with them." He shook his head. "You have no idea what you're walking into." "Perhaps not," Rebecca acknowledged, "but I'd rather face unknown challenges of my own choosing than suffocate in a life chosen for me." The sheriff studied her face, searching for signs of coercion or confusion. Finding none, his shoulders slumped slightly. "Your father's authorized me to bring you back by any means necessary. Says you're not in your right mind." Fear flickered through Rebecca, but she kept her voice level. "And what do you think, Sheriff?" Parker sighed heavily, removing his hat, to run a hand through graying hair. "I think you're making a terrible mistake, but I also think forcing you back would be an even bigger one." He replaced his hat, decision evident in his posture. "I can give you a day's head start. After that, I'll have to organize a search party, for appearance's sake, if nothing else." Relief washed through Rebecca. "Thank you." "Don't thank me," Parker said gruffly. "Just promise me you'll be careful, and that if things don't work out with Cooper and these Lakota, you'll find a way to let your father know you're safe." "I will," Rebecca promised, the weight of her decision settling more firmly on her shoulders. "Please tell my father. Tell him I'm sorry for the pain this causes him, but not for my choice." The sheriff nodded once, then turned his horse back toward Pine Creek. "One day, Rebecca. Make it count." As Parker rode away, 2 Rivers and Elijah returned, having witnessed the exchange from a distance. "He's letting you go?" Elijah asked, surprise evident in his tone. Rebecca nodded. "For now, but we should move quickly." 2 Rivers studied the retreating figure of the sheriff. "That man has honor. He listens to his heart, not just the law." He turned to Rebecca, his expression grave. "We must reach the main party and depart immediately. The others will not be so understanding." They rode hard for the next hour, reaching the Lakota encampment as the last teepees were being dismantled and packed onto travois. Rebecca observed the efficient process with fascination, women directing the breakdown of their dwellings with practiced precision, children gathering smaller possessions, men preparing the horses and checking weapons. Her arrival with Elijah and 2 Rivers caused a stir. Conversations paused, heads turned, and curious eyes assessed the white woman in their midst. Rebecca felt the weight of their gazes, understanding for the first time how Elijah must have felt during his initial days among them. An elderly woman approached, her face a map of wrinkles that deepened as she frowned at Rebecca. She spoke rapidly in Lakota to Two Rivers, who responded with equal fluency but greater calm. The exchange continued for several minutes, with occasional gestures toward Rebecca and Elijah. "What is she saying?" Rebecca whispered to Elijah. "She's concerned about bringing another white woman into the group," Elijah translated quietly. "Says it will draw unwanted attention and possibly danger." The elderly woman switched suddenly to accented but clear English, fixing Rebecca with a penetrating stare. "You think life is hard in your town, with your wooden walls and iron stoves? Out here, winter kills the weak. Soldiers kill the strong. Why should we risk ourselves for you?" Rebecca swallowed, taken aback by the direct challenge. "I don't expect anyone to risk themselves for me. I'm willing to work, to learn your ways, to contribute however I can." The woman scoffed. "Pretty words. But when your hands bleed from tanning hides and your belly growls with hunger, will you still choose this path?" Before Rebecca could respond, Two Rivers spoke. "Grandmother, she stood for Elijah Cooper when his own people abandoned him. She defied her father and refused a comfortable marriage to follow what her spirit knows is right." His voice softened. "Does this not remind you of another young woman many winters ago?" The older woman's expression shifted, a mixture of memory and reluctant amusement crossing her weathered features. "You speak of things you know nothing about, grandson." "I speak of what you taught me," Two Rivers countered respectfully. "That courage deserves respect, regardless of where it is found." A tense silence followed, broken only by the sounds of the camps dismantling around them. Finally, the elderly woman, Two Rivers' grandmother, Rebecca now realized, gave a short nod. "She rides with the women," she declared, "and she learns our ways, not just the ones that suit her." Her gaze locked onto Rebecca's once more. "The path you have chosen requires more than brave words, white woman. It requires a new heart." With that, she turned and walked away, calling instructions to several younger women who immediately approached Rebecca. "Grandmother has accepted you," Two Rivers explained. "For now, the rest will be up to you." Rebecca nodded, understanding this was merely the first of many challenges she would face. The women guided her to a group preparing the last of the camp for travel, gesturing for her to dismount and help. For the next hour, Rebecca worked alongside Lakota women, folding buffalo hides, securing bundles onto travois, and preparing for the journey ahead. Few spoke English, and those who did offered only sparse instructions. Yet Rebecca observed closely, mimicking their movements and techniques, determined to prove her willingness to learn. By mid-morning, the entire camp was in motion. A caravan of horses, people, and travois moving northwest across the rolling prairie. Rebecca rode among the women and children, her mare tethered to a travois, carrying an elderly man too frail to ride independently. The pace was steady, but not hurried. The Lakota clearly practiced in the art of efficient travel. Two Rivers rode at the front with several other men, scanning the horizon constantly for signs of danger. Elijah moved between groups, his facility with the Lakota language making him a useful intermediary. As they traveled, Rebecca's thoughts turned to Pine Creek and what must be happening there. Her father would be beside himself with anger and worry. Mrs. Henderson would be spreading elaborate theories about her disappearance. Jonathan Thompson would return tomorrow to find his prospective bride vanished. The scandal would provide gossip for months. Yet as the distance between herself and Pine Creek grew, Rebecca felt those concerns receding in importance. Here, riding Beneath the vast Dakota sky, the social constraints that had dominated her life seemed as insubstantial as the clouds above. Around midday, the caravan paused to rest the horses and allow for a simple meal. Rebecca dismounted stiffly, her muscles protesting the unaccustomed hours of riding. She helped distribute dried meat and berries, accepting her own small portion with gratitude. As she ate, Elijah approached, sitting nearby on a sun-warmed rock. "How are you holding up?" he asked quietly. Rebecca smiled despite her fatigue. "Better than I expected, though I suspect tomorrow I'll feel every mile in my bones." Elijah nodded, understanding in his eyes. "The first days are the hardest, but you'll be surprised how quickly the body adapts." He glanced around at the Lakota moving efficiently around them. "How are they treating you?" "With caution," Rebecca replied honestly, "and curiosity. Two Rivers' grandmother seems to be reserving judgment." "Flying Hawk," Elijah supplied. "She's the eldest medicine woman and Two Rivers' maternal grandmother. Her approval matters." Rebecca absorbed this information, understanding the importance of navigating the social hierarchies of her new companions. "Will we reach our destination soon?" Elijah shook his head. "Not for many days. The place Two Rivers speaks of lies near the Western Mountains, at least 2 weeks' journey from here." He studied her face. "Having second thoughts?" "No," Rebecca answered without hesitation, "just adjusting my expectations." "Good advice for us all," came Two Rivers' voice as he approached. He crouched beside them, his expression serious. "We've spotted riders to the east, 6 men moving fast." Rebecca's heart sank. "From Pine Creek?" Two Rivers nodded. "Sheriff Parker has either changed his mind or been overruled. They are following our trail." "But the sheriff promised a day's head start," Rebecca protested. "Promises to Indians and those who ride with them are easily broken." Two Rivers replied without bitterness, merely stating a fact. "We must decide quickly. Fight, flee, or divide." Elijah frowned. Fighting would only justify their pursuit and likely bring more trouble. "And we cannot outrun them with the elderly and children," Two Rivers added, "which leaves division." Rebecca looked between them, understanding dawning. "You want to split the group? Draw them away from the main party." Two Rivers nodded. "I will take 4 warriors and lead the pursuit away. The main group will continue northwest as planned." "I should go with you," Elijah said immediately. "I know those men, how they think." "No," Two Rivers countered firmly. "You must stay with the main group. They trust you, and your knowledge of white ways will be needed." His gaze shifted to Rebecca. "And you must protect her. If those men catch her alone with us, they will assume the worst." The implications hung in the air between them. The assumptions Pine Creek's men would make about a white woman traveling with Lakota warriors, the violence that might result. Rebecca straightened her shoulders. "Let me go with you." Both men stared at her in surprise. "If I'm with you," she continued, the plan forming as she spoke, "they'll have to listen. I can tell them directly that I've left of my own free will, that I haven't been taken against my will." "And put yourself at risk of being forcibly returned?" Two Rivers questioned. "It's a risk," Rebecca acknowledged, "but less of one than having them attack you because they believe you've kidnapped me." Elijah shook his head. "It's too dangerous. If your father is among them—" "He's not," Rebecca said with certainty. "My father hasn't ridden more than a mile from Pine Creek in years. His arthritis wouldn't allow it." Two Rivers studied her with newfound respect. "Your courage is admirable, but Elijah is right. The risk is too great." "Then what do you suggest?" Rebecca pressed. Two Rivers considered for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "There is a place a half-day's ride from here, Spirit Rock. The land there forms a natural fortress. If we reach it before they catch us, we can hold a defensive position without bloodshed. And reason with them from a position of safety. Elijah concluded, nodding slowly. It could work. The main group continues northwest, Two Rivers decided. We take a smaller party, myself, Elijah, Rebecca, and 3 warriors, east towards Spirit Rock. If we can reach it by nightfall, we can control the encounter. The plan agreed upon, the group sprung into action. Flying Hawk clearly disapproved of Rebecca's inclusion, but offered no argument beyond a stern warning delivered through Elijah. If you slow them down, white woman, they will leave you behind. Within minutes, Rebecca found herself riding hard across the prairie, flanked by Two Rivers and Elijah, 3 Lakota warriors following close behind. They rode southeast, deliberately creating a trail distinct from the main group's northwestern path. The pace was punishing. Rebecca clung to her mare's mane, focusing on keeping her seat as they galloped across the rolling terrain. Her inexperience as a rider was painfully evident, but determination kept her from voicing complaint despite growing discomfort. Two Rivers led them on a circuitous route, sometimes doubling back or crossing shallow streams to confuse their trail. By mid-afternoon, Rebecca's legs burned with fatigue and her back ached from the constant motion. Still, she pressed on, aware that their safety depended on reaching Spirit Rock before their pursuers caught up. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, a distinctive formation appeared in the distance, a massive outcropping of rock rising from the prairie like the prow of a great stone ship. Spirit Rock, Two Rivers confirmed, pointing. We must hurry. The riders gain on us. Rebecca glanced back, her heart sinking at the sight of distant figures on horseback, perhaps 2 miles behind but moving rapidly. They've seen us. Good, Two Rivers replied, surprising her. Now they will follow us directly and leave the main group alone. They pushed their tired horses harder, reaching the base of Spirit Rock as the sun touched the horizon. The formation was even more impressive up close. Sheer walls of striated stone, rising nearly 100 feet, with a natural ramp leading to a flat-topped area large enough to make a defensible position. The horses cannot climb, Two Rivers explained as they dismounted. We will secure them here and ascend on foot. One of the warriors quickly set about concealing the horses in a small grove of trees near a spring at the base of the rock. The others gathered essential supplies, weapons, water, some food for the climb. Rebecca's legs nearly buckled as she dismounted, muscles protesting the sudden change. Elijah steadied her with a hand on her elbow. Are you all right? He asked quietly. She nodded, determined not to show weakness. Just stiff. I'll manage. The climb was arduous, especially for Rebecca's unaccustomed body. Handholds and footholds had been carved into the rock generations ago, making the ascent possible, but not easy. By the time they reached the top, twilight had deepened around them, and their pursuers had reached the base of the formation. Two Rivers directed the positioning of his small group, placing Rebecca and Elijah at the center of the plateau, away from the edge. The 3 warriors took positions that allowed them to see in all directions while remaining protected by rock outcroppings. From below came a shout. Cooper, we know you're up there. Send down the girl. Rebecca recognized Sheriff Parker's voice, though the tone was different from their morning encounter. Harder, official. Two Rivers nodded to Elijah, who moved cautiously to the edge. We're here to talk, not fight, he called down. Rebecca Miller is here of her own free will. Let her speak for herself, came another voice. Reverend Thompson's, Rebecca realized with surprise. Before Elijah could respond, Rebecca joined him at the edge, though she stayed partially behind a rock formation for protection. I'm here, she called, and I left Pine Creek by choice. The gathering darkness made it difficult to distinguish faces, But Rebecca could make out 6 riders, Sheriff Parker, Reverend Thompson, and 4 men she couldn't immediately identify. "Rebecca," the Reverend called up, his voice carrying a forced patience. "Your father is beside himself with worry. This foolishness has gone on long enough. Come down now, and we can all return home with minimal scandal." "I'm not coming back," Rebecca replied firmly. "I left a note explaining my decision. A decision made under duress or manipulation isn't valid," Reverend Thompson countered. "These men have clearly influenced you against your better judgment." Rebecca felt a surge of indignation. "No one has influenced or forced me to do anything. This is my choice, my path." Sheriff Parker's voice came next, quieter but carrying, clearly in the still evening air. "Rebecca, I gave you a head start because I believed you were acting of your own accord. But your father is convinced Cooper has bewitched you somehow, filled your head with promises he can't keep." "My father is wrong," Rebecca called back. "Elijah Cooper has offered me nothing but the freedom to choose my own future." A derisive laugh rose from one of the other men. "Freedom? With Indians?" Girls lost her mind for sure. Two Rivers moved forward now, his imposing figure silhouetted against the darkening sky. "You have followed us far enough. Rebecca Miller has spoken her truth. Return to your town and let us continue our journey in peace." "We don't take orders from Indians," came the angry retort. "Send the girl down or we're coming up after her." Tension rippled through the small group on the plateau. The Lakota warriors readied their weapons, though they made no aggressive moves. "That would be unwise," Two Rivers stated calmly. "We hold the high ground in growing darkness. Any attempt to climb would put your men at great risk." A murmur of consultation rose from below. Rebecca could imagine the debate, the recognition of their tactical disadvantage against the determination to complete their mission. "We'll camp here tonight," Sheriff Parker finally called up. "This conversation will continue in the daylight, but know this, we're not leaving without Rebecca Miller." Two Rivers exchanged glances with Elijah, both men recognizing the temporary stalemate. "Then we have the night to consider our positions," Two Rivers replied. "We will speak again at dawn." As the men below withdrew to make camp, Two Rivers led their small group to the center of the plateau, where a depression in the rock offered some protection from the wind that had begun to rise with nightfall. "They will not attempt to climb in darkness," he said with certainty, "but we must maintain watch through the night." The warriors nodded, already organizing a rotation. Elijah began gathering small stones to build a fire ring. "Should we risk a fire?" Rebecca asked, aware that it would make their position more visible. "They already know exactly where we are," Elijah pointed out, "and the night will be cold at this elevation." Two Rivers nodded his agreement. "A small fire. We have dried buffalo dung that will burn with minimal smoke." As darkness settled completely around them, the small fire cast flickering light on their faces. Below, Rebecca could see the larger campfire of their pursuers, a reminder of the confrontation that awaited them at dawn. "What will happen tomorrow?" she asked quietly, accepting a strip of dried meat from Two Rivers. "They will try to persuade you," he replied, "and if persuasion fails, they may attempt to take you by force." Rebecca shivered, not entirely from the evening chill. "And if they succeed?" Elijah moved closer, his expression serious in the firelight. "We won't let that happen." "Not without bloodshed," Rebecca pointed out, "which is exactly what we're trying to avoid." Two Rivers studied the flames before responding. "Among my people, when two sides reach an impasse, sometimes a third path emerges." He looked up at Rebecca. "Tonight, we should each search our hearts for that path." The simple wisdom of his words resonated with Rebecca. As the others arranged themselves for the night, taking turns at watch, she found a spot near the fire and wrapped herself in a buffalo robe one of the warriors had carried up. Exhaustion from the day's journey pulled at her, yet sleep remained. Elusive, her thoughts circled between Pine Creek, the confrontation to come, and the uncertain future that lay beyond. Had she made a terrible mistake? Or was this exactly where she needed to be, despite the dangers? Sometime in the night, Rebecca finally drifted into restless sleep, dreaming of eagles and wolves and vast open spaces where no walls confined her, movements. She woke to Two Rivers' gentle touch on her shoulder. "Dawn approaches," he said simply. "They are stirring below." Rebecca sat up, muscles protesting from yesterday's ride and the hard stone bed. The eastern sky had begun to lighten, though the sun remained hidden behind the horizon. Around her, the warriors and Elijah were already awake, checking weapons and sharing water from a skin. "I've been thinking about what you said," Rebecca told Two Rivers as she accepted a drink. "About a third path." He nodded, waiting for her to continue. "What if I go down to speak with them directly, not to surrender, but to negotiate on neutral ground at the base of the rock?" Elijah immediately shook his head. "Too dangerous. They could simply grab you and ride away." "Not if you and the warriors maintain position up here," Rebecca countered, "with clear sight lines and weapons ready. They wouldn't risk violence with such odds." Two Rivers considered her suggestion thoughtfully. "What would you say to them?" "The truth," Rebecca replied simply, "that I'm not returning to Pine Creek, that my decision is made, that their only choices are to accept it or create bloodshed trying to force me back." "They may not listen," Two Rivers warned. "Some won't," Rebecca acknowledged, "but Sheriff Parker might, and if I can convince him, he has the authority to make the others stand down." The three of them discussed the strategy as dawn brightened around them. Finally, Two Rivers nodded his agreement. "It is a brave plan," he said, "and perhaps our best chance to avoid conflict." As the sun crested the horizon, Sheriff Parker's voice carried up from below. "Cooper, Two Rivers, let's continue our discussion." Elijah moved to the edge, Rebecca beside him. "Rebecca wishes to come down and speak with you directly," he called, "on neutral ground, under peaceful terms." A consultation among the men below, then Parker replied, "Agreed, but she comes alone." "Not alone," Two Rivers countered, joining them at the edge. "She will meet you halfway between your camp and the base of the rock. Sheriff Parker may approach with one man only. The rest stay back." "More discussion below then." "Agreed. Send her down." Rebecca took a deep breath, steadying her nerves. Elijah touched her arm gently. "Are you sure about this?" She nodded. "It's the only way." Two Rivers handed her a small object, a stone pendant on a leather cord. "For courage," he said simply. The descent was easier than the climb had been, though Rebecca's stiff muscles complained with each movement. When she reached the bottom, she took a moment to straighten her clothing and smooth her hair, aware of the impression she needed to make. Not a kidnapped victim or addled girl, but a woman in command of her own choices. As agreed, she walked to the midpoint between the rock and the men's camp. Sheriff Parker and Reverend Thompson approached from the other side, stopping a few yards away. "Rebecca," Parker acknowledged, his expression a mixture of concern and wariness, "you've led us on quite a chase." "I never asked to be chased, Sheriff," she replied evenly. "I made my decision clear in my note to my father." Reverend Thompson stepped forward, his clerical collar a stark white against his travel-worn clothing. "My dear, whatever grievances you have with your father's plans for you, this is not the answer. Running away with," he gestured toward Spirit Rock, "with these men, abandoning everything proper and decent." "I'm not running away from something, Reverend," Rebecca interrupted. "I'm moving toward something, a life of my own choosing." with Indians and a reformed drunkard, Thompson scoffed. What kind of life could that possibly be? I don't know yet, Rebecca admitted, but it will be mine, not one prescribed for me by others who believe they know best. Sheriff Parker studied her face carefully. Your father is offering terms, Rebecca. Come back now, and he'll withdraw. His insistence on the Thompson marriage. You can have time to consider other options, other suitors. The offer gave Rebecca pause. It represented a significant concession from her father. Yet even as she considered it, she knew it changed nothing fundamental about her situation. Other options, other suitors, all within the same confining framework. My path lies elsewhere, Sheriff, she said firmly. Please tell my father I'm grateful for his offer, but my decision is made. Even if it breaks his heart, Reverend Thompson challenged, even if it destroys him to lose you this way? Rebecca felt the weight of his words, the genuine pain her choice was causing. I hope someday he'll understand that I needed to find my own way, just as he did when he left his father's farm to come west. Sheriff Parker sighed heavily. Rebecca, I can't force you to return if you're truly acting of your own free will. But I need to be certain. These men, he glanced towards Spirit Rock, they haven't threatened or coerced you in any way. No, Rebecca stated unequivocally. They've offered me freedom, nothing more. The sheriff and Reverend exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. And what of your reputation? Thompson asked. Traveling unchaperoned with Cooper and these Lakota, you'll be ruined in the eyes of decent society. Rebecca smiled slightly. Then it's fortunate I'm headed somewhere that values different qualities in a woman. Sheriff Parker removed his hat, running a hand through his hair in frustration. You understand, I can't stop the others from trying to bring you back by force, especially your father. He's convinced you're not in your right mind. Then make them understand, Rebecca urged. You have the authority. Tell them I've made my choice freely and that any attempt to force me back will end badly for everyone. Parker studied her for a long moment, weighing his duty against his conscience. I'll do what I can, he finally said, replacing his hat. But you need to understand, once you ride away with Cooper and these Lakota, there's no coming back, not to the life you knew. I understand, Rebecca replied, the weight of her decision settling more firmly on her shoulders. Reverend Thompson shook his head, disappointment etched in his features. May God guide you back to the proper path, Miss Miller. I fear you'll find only hardship and regret on this one. With those parting words, the two men turned and walked back to their camp. Rebecca watched them go, then slowly made her way back to the base of Spirit Rock, where Elijah waited to help her begin the climb. What happened? He asked as they ascended. I'm not sure yet, Rebecca replied honestly, but I think Sheriff Parker might help us. When they reached the top, Rebecca recounted the conversation to Two Rivers and the others. The Lakota leader listened intently, his expression revealing nothing of his thoughts until she finished. The sheriff is a man caught between worlds, he observed, between what his position demands and what his heart knows is right. He turned to study the camp below, where animated discussion was clearly taking place. We wait and watch. The morning stretched on with no clear resolution from below. The sun climbed higher, bringing warmth to the stone plateau. Two Rivers sent one of the warriors down the backside of the formation to check on their horses and bring back water. Shortly before midday, movement in the camp caught their attention. Sheriff Parker and another man were mounting their horses while the remaining four engaged in what appeared to be a heated argument. They're dividing, Elijah observed, watching as Parker and his companion rode away from the camp, heading east, toward Pine Creek. Parker's leaving, and taking one man with him, Two Rivers added, leaving four. Rebecca felt a mixture of hope and apprehension. Had Parker decided to support her choice, or was he simply returning to Pine Creek to gather more men? The question remained unanswered as the day progressed. The 4 remaining men maintained their position at the base of Spirit Rock, occasionally calling up demands that were met with stone silence from above. By late afternoon, 2 Rivers made a decision. We cannot remain here indefinitely. Our horses need proper grazing, and our food supplies are limited. What are you suggesting? Rebecca asked. Night travel, 2 Rivers replied. We descend the backside after dark, retrieve our horses, and ride northwest to rejoin our people. They'll pursue us, Elijah pointed out. 2 Rivers nodded. Perhaps, but 4 men against our warriors would be unwise, and they know it. As they prepared for their departure, checking supplies and readying weapons, a cloud of dust appeared on the eastern horizon. Riders approaching fast from the direction of Pine Creek. Reinforcements, Elijah said grimly, counting the distant figures. 4, no, 5 riders. Rebecca's heart sank. If Parker had returned with more men, their chances of escaping without conflict were significantly diminished. But as the riders drew closer, 2 Rivers' expression changed from concern to something approaching satisfaction. Not reinforcements, he corrected. Look. Through a small spyglass, Rebecca could now make out the approaching party. Sheriff Parker, the man who'd left with him, and 3 Lakota warriors, identifiable by their distinctive dress and riding style. Our people, 2 Rivers confirmed. Parker has brought them from the main group. The arrival of Parker and the Lakota warriors created immediate tension in the camp below. Rebecca could see animated discussions, gestures towards Spirit Rock, and what appeared to be disagreement among the remaining Pine Creek men. Finally, Sheriff Parker separated from the group and rode to the base of the formation. Cooper, 2 Rivers, I need to speak with you. This time, 2 Rivers descended alone to meet with Parker, leaving Elijah and the warriors on the plateau with Rebecca. The conversation below lasted nearly half an hour, with occasional glances upward. When 2 Rivers returned, his normally impassive face showed signs of satisfaction. The sheriff has brokered a resolution, he announced. He has convinced the others to respect Rebecca's choice, with conditions. What conditions? Rebecca asked cautiously. You must write a letter to your father, confirming once more that you leave of your own free will. And 2 Rivers glanced at Elijah. Cooper must agree to marry you in a proper ceremony before we leave Dakota Territory. Rebecca felt heat rise in her cheeks. Marry? But we're not. I never intended. It's their concession to propriety, Elijah explained gently. Your reputation may mean nothing to you anymore, but it matters to your father. And to the sheriff, too, Rivers added. He believes this compromise will allow your father to eventually accept your departure with dignity. Rebecca looked between the 2 men, sudden uncertainty gripping her. Marriage to Elijah had never been part of her consideration when she'd fled Pine Creek. She had sought freedom, not a different form of binding. Elijah seemed to read her thoughts. It would be in name only, he said quietly. A formality to satisfy those we leave behind. Among the Lakota and at our destination, our relationship would be whatever we choose to make it. 2 Rivers nodded his agreement. The journey ahead is long, and the future uncertain. What exists between you can grow naturally, without the constraints of white man's ceremony. Rebecca considered the proposal a marriage of convenience that would grant her the freedom to discover who she truly was, while providing a bridge back to her father should she ever wish to rebuild that relationship. I'll agree, she said finally, if Elijah is willing. Elijah's expression was solemn as he nodded. I am. They descended from Spirit Rock together, the entire group moving cautiously toward the camp, where Parker and the others waited. Rebecca felt the weight of every eye upon her as they approached, particularly the calculating stare of Reverend Thompson. "I've explained the arrangement," Sheriff Parker said without preamble. "Reverend Thompson will perform the ceremony, after which you'll be free to continue your journey." Rebecca turned to the Reverend, whose disapproval was palpable despite his formal agreement. "And you're willing to do this?" "Against my better judgment," Thompson replied stiffly. "But Sheriff Parker has convinced me it's the lesser evil compared to the alternatives." The ceremony that followed was perhaps the briefest wedding in Dakota Territory history. Standing beneath the shadow of Spirit Rock, with unwilling witnesses from Pine Creek and stoic Lakota observers, Rebecca and Elijah exchanged the minimum vows required for legal binding. When Thompson pronounced them husband and wife with obvious reluctance, no one stepped forward to offer congratulations or well wishes. Instead, a heavy silence fell over the gathered parties, broken only by Sheriff Parker's practical instructions. "I've requested that the Lakota escort you as far as the territorial border," he told Rebecca and Elijah. "After that, you're beyond Pine Creek's concern." Rebecca nodded, then turned to face the men who had pursued her from her hometown. "Please tell my father that I'm sorry for his pain, but not for my choice." "He may never forgive you," one of the men, Dr. Grant, Rebecca now recognized, said bluntly. "That's his choice to make," Rebecca replied, "as this was mine." As the unlikely wedding party prepared to separate, Sheriff Parker approached Rebecca one last time, speaking quietly so only she could hear. "I'm placing a lot of faith in your judgment, Rebecca. Don't make me regret it." "I won't," she promised, surprising herself with her certainty. The journey that followed was unlike anything Rebecca could have imagined during her years in Pine Creek. Traveling with the Lakota band, she learned their ways by necessity and immersion, how to set up a teepee, prepare pemmican, tan hides, and ride for days through all weather. Elijah kept his word about their arrangement, treating her with respectful distance that gradually evolved into genuine friendship as they shared the challenges of the journey. Two Rivers became both mentor and protector, patient with her mistakes and generous with his knowledge. Flying Hawk, initially the most skeptical of Rebecca's presence, eventually became her most demanding teacher, insisting she learn Lakota words, techniques for finding edible plants, and the stories that gave meaning to their traditions. "You have strong hands for a white woman," the elderly woman grudgingly acknowledged after Rebecca had successfully helped prepare a buffalo hide. "Perhaps you will survive the winter after all." The weeks passed, marked by the changing landscape as they traveled steadily northwest. Pine-covered hills gave way to more rugged terrain, the distant silhouette of mountains appearing on the horizon like a promise. 6 weeks after leaving Pine Creek, they arrived at their destination, a sheltered valley with a clear stream running through its center, stands of pine providing both protection from harsh winds and material for building. Several families had already established a small settlement there, a mixture of Lakota, displaced Cherokee, and a few white traders who had married into native tribes. Their welcome was cautious but genuine, recognizing in the newcomers the same desire for a life beyond the conflicts that plagued the territories. Rebecca and Elijah established their own small cabin at the edge of the settlement. Their relationship remained undefined, evolving day by day as they navigated their new reality together. Sometimes Rebecca caught Elijah watching her with an expression that suggested he might eventually want more than friendship, but he never pressed or presumed. On a crisp autumn morning, as Rebecca stood watching the first dusting of snow on the distant peaks, 2 Rivers joined her. "Winter comes soon," he observed. "Are you afraid?" Rebecca considered the question seriously. The coming winter would test everything she had learned, every choice she had made. Yet as she surveyed the small settlement, people working together, regardless of background or origin, she felt a certainty she had never known in Pine Creek. "No," she answered truthfully, "I'm not afraid." Two Rivers nodded, satisfaction in his eyes. "Then you have found your true path." As Rebecca watched the sun rise fully over the mountains, she thought of her father and Pine Creek, acknowledging the pain her departure had caused. Yet she couldn't regret the journey that had brought her here, to this place where she was valued for her strength and determination rather than her conformity. She had no illusions about the challenges ahead. Life on this frontier would be harder, in many ways, than the one she'd left behind, but it would be a life shaped by her own choices, her own hands. Rebecca touched the dream catcher that hung beside her cabin door, its intricate webbing now familiar to her fingers. Like the path she had chosen, it was neither purely Lakota nor white, but something new, a bridge between worlds that allowed the best elements of both to pass through. She had found her freedom not in the absence of connections or responsibilities, but in the power to choose which ones would define her, and in that choice lay a kind of liberty Pine Creek could never have offered. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.